Three, two, one. Hey everybody, you're listening to the Alicocast show, where I interview experts in everything from woodcarving to business in order to dissect their daily practices, routines, and mindsets. And today I am warmly welcoming the great Brian Booth Craig, who is amongst America's most prominent sculptors. His work can be seen at the Louis K. Mizell Gallery, where he is exclusively represented, and his stunning figurative work can be seen. And I recommend, if you haven't seen his work, which I'm sure you already have if you're listening to this, you have to check it out. His forms are so fantastically beautiful, excellently rendered, and coming from the perspective of a carver, something worth looking up to. His work is stunning. I was so excited for this interview today. I found myself chewing on the wrapping paper around the turkey slices right before coming on. I was just noticing a textural difference in one slice to the other, and I realized I ate half a sheet of wax paper. I am just beside myself to do this podcast, and want to welcome you, Brian. Thanks for doing this.
Oh, thank you, Alec. I appreciate it. Glad you're having me on.
Yeah, it's fantastic. I know most people listening know you as an incredible sculptor, but I wanted to start out introducing the topic of poetry. Can you tell me about your interest in poetry?
Yeah, I as people know that follow me on Instagram in particular, and a little bit on Facebook, I daily post a poem that I'm reading or that I've recently read. Usually, I'll pick a poet and read them for a week or so, and as I do that, I post a poem on my story. I guess it's called stories, right? On Instagram, stories
Right.
posts. I get them all confused on the Instagram stories. And part of the reason I do that is because I've found poetry to be useful to me as an artist. And the reason I find it very useful is because it's descriptive of a human experience without being too narrative in its specificity. So it leaves the reader's mind open to interpret with imagery that they create based on the suggestions of the poet. And so I found poetry to be incredibly useful for my creative practice, and opening my mind to all kinds of possibilities of imagery that aren't necessarily linearly directed to the subject matter that I'm dealing with in this studio. Subject matter is the human form, and of course, the human form, if you depict it in any manner, whether it's abstracted or fairly realistic, like I do. Realistic is kind of a relative term, of course, but then that's a very straightforward subject matter. In other words, you're observing human beings in their physical nature, and you're depicting them in another material, in another form, another scale, so forth. And so you can get easily caught up in the activity of observing, recording, and miss sort of the magical quality of what it means to be alive in this world, right? And I find that poetry helps sort of relax my mind and open it up to the possibility of nonlinear thinking. And so it's been very useful to me, and I've been reading poetry for like a long time, and it's very useful for my creative practice. And so that's one of the reasons I post it, and it's just become a regular practice of mine. And I have some favorite poets that I post, but I have a pretty large collection of poetry books, so I'm not just scrolling through Google looking for like, oh, what poem will get people's attention today. I'm literally just whatever I happen. Like I have a book right here. I have Hafiz right next to me, Sufi poet, and that's what I was reading a little earlier. Something strikes me, and I feel like the mood is right. I'll post it. And so it's just sharing a little bit of an insight into my life outside of the act of manipulating clay or bronze or whatever it might be. So that's the primary reason I do that. But in terms of, but ultimately, I'm sort of an evangelist for the power of art.
Mm.
I think it's a very important thing for people to be reminded of the fact that it's one of the things that separates us from our cousins in nature, other species. That we have this imaginative quality to us that can both so contemplate our consciousness in the act of being conscious, and also contemplate our origins and endings, and ask questions about those things. And so uh, every artist has different ways of approaching that aspect of human nature, that creatively. But I find it very useful to access what other people are doing for inspiration, and poetry happens to be one of those forms that I find incredibly like engaging and enlivening. And one of the another thing about that for me, my personal life is I love to read, and you can see I have books behind me. I have books all over the place. They're in my studio, in my bedroom, in the kitchen, in the they're all over. But unfortunately, life is incredibly busy. I have a lot going on, and I don't really have the time to read as much as I'd like to. There was a time when I would probably read like a book a week or something, and it's not like that anymore. I just don't have the bandwidth for it, or the time. And it's just one of those seasons in my life where that happens to be the case. But poetry, I can pick up a poetry book in the morning, read it when I'm eating my breakfast. Just pick one out, and then I can ruminate on it. Especially if it's a short form poem, and I can ruminate on it, and it can stick with me through the day, and then maybe do something that at night. And it's a way of continuing an engagement with with writing and reading without an incredible time commitment. So it's become a habit of mine that I've been keeping up for quite a few years. So yeah, that's why I do it. And I get response, like a lot of the other thing was, when I first started doing that, I thought people are just going to get bored of this. They're just be posting a poem every day. But actually, I get a lot of responses. People reply, say, this was really great. Where is this from? I always, of course, attribute the poem, the poet's name when I post the poem on my page. But yeah, that's how I do it. That's why I do it. So,
as an admitted novice in the world of poetry, where would you recommend I start?
I would start with. That's a very good question. I mean, I would start with something a little more contemporary, rather than going right to something that would be where the diction and vocabulary might be somewhat difficult, like Shakespeare.
Right.
You're right.
Oh, for sure.
And it's not because
quick insert into that.
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt you. Interject.
That's okay.
But I was reading King Lear a few months, actually now years ago, and I was sort of struggling. I was reading through, and I'm thinking this must be a modernized version, and I'm having a hard time. And I flipped the back of the book around, and it's the kids' edition of King Lear. So I just wanted to give you some context for the suggestion and affirm your statement there earlier.
Yeah. Well, one of the things about reading things that are difficult.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, if you're reading the kids' version, it's you're probably
high school, right?
Yeah. You probably were adding a layer of difficulty in an ironic way there. But one of the things about things. In fact, my daughter, I have a 16-year-old daughter, and there a couple weeks ago, we were talking over dinner about what they're reading in school, and she said they're reading Shakespeare. And I said, "Do you like it?" And she's like, "Not really." And I because it's difficult, she didn't understand. I said, and my suggestion for things like that, and this is actually a suggestion for all art forms that seem somewhat obtuse and or very opaque and hard to penetrate the meaning of. The thing to do is to just experience it, absorb it, without trying to rationalize it as you're doing it, right? And it's the same thing for art forms that seem somewhat difficult, visual art forms that seem somewhat difficult or confusing. Oftentimes we want to we want things to be incredibly rational and explainable, but actually art operates on a nonverbal level many times, most of the time, actually.
Right.
Think of it this way. If you were listening to, say, Mozart, right, you wouldn't be in the midst of listening to Mozart kind of trying to rationalize its meaning, right?
Right. Right.
If you do that, you've interrupted the experience in a certain sense.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
Right. It's almost like a meditative practice in a way, where if you start focusing on the words that enter your mind, and instead of just watching them pass by, now the train's already gone, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you're stuck at the station trying to figure out, like, what, did I have a ticket for that?
Right.
That's one of my suggestions for poetry. Whenever I talk to people, who are like, I just don't understand it. I said, well, you're trying too hard. Don't try so hard to understand it. Read it, read the rhythms of it, read it like several times, and the meaning will emerge. And the same thing I say with artwork that people find somewhat difficult. And I do that for myself, by the way. I actually find it an important challenge to my presuppositions when I encounter a work of art in a gallery, in a museum, that seems somewhat incomprehensible to me. I work under the assumption that the artist who made that thing was fully engaged in the act of making it, and not simply, arbitrarily doing things, even though to me it may seem like that. And when I charitably give them the credit for the engagement that they've pursued in that activity, then I can then say, well, maybe I'm the one that just doesn't, I just need to live in its presence a little bit. That doesn't mean that I will ever fully understand it or necessarily even like it, but at least I've given it the opportunity to operate in my life in a way that isn't interrupted by all of my presuppositions. And so in many ways, I think poetry is a perfect exercise for doing that, but particularly certain kinds of poetry, because if you can relax your mind and just read the rhythms of it, and then start to, as the words start to emerge as meaningful words, and they get assembled, the imagery will create a feeling and an experience for you. And in fact, sometimes I really like the poems that are like the most abstruse are the most fun to read, because I can feel the meaning in it, but every time I read it, something else comes out of it. And one of the things about art is that, and what makes it such a powerful part of our human experience, is that art doesn't answer questions. Right. It doesn't solve problems in the kind of literal sense that we think of solving problems, which is why many people say it's useless. Right. They say, well, it has no function, which of course isn't true, because one of the primary function is to ask questions. And the more questions a work of art brings up in your mind, actually, the more powerful that art form is. So if it asks simple questions and reveals its answers, well, it's operating on a very surface level. But if it forces you to ask lots of questions of it and of yourself and of human experience, then it's doing very profound work. And that's why when people say that art is useless because it doesn't give you the answers, it doesn't solve a problem, they think that all of life should be just a series of giving you solved problems, right? When really a full life is one where you've just asked more and more and more and more questions. You've opened up more and more things. Of course, answers do come, or they seem to come. You have some sort of organizing principle for living your life through some series of answers that you've come to conclusions on. But really, art is it's a question machine. It makes it, and that's how it should work in the hearts and minds of viewers and makers too, by the way. So that's how. And so anyway, I know that's a very long answer for how a suggestion for where to begin with poetry. I think it's the reason I gave that a long answer is because I would use the same suggestion to people who encounter artwork of any form that seems incomprehensible to them. So I would say, so back to what I was originally saying about poetry, and when you asked the suggestion, I would say start with something that's more contemporary, that would use language that resonates with you, like a Billy Collins, for example, who is a former poet laureate, just brilliant poetry. If I had one of his books right here next to me, I could read one out, but I don't have it handy. Yeah, that's a good example of a poet who is full of wit and insight, and will make you really stop in your tracks, but with very, very economical language that will resonate with your contemporary mind. So, or somebody like Mary Oliver is another
Oh,
one.
right. Yeah.
She's a personal favorite of mine. I tend to like. Look, I'm open to any kind. I'll read any kind of poetry, actually, just like art. Like I said with art, if it's there, I want to experience it. I want to engage with it. But I do tend to lean toward the poets that are connecting the experience of the physical world with some sort of spiritual experience, whether it's the Sufi poets like Rumi or Hafiz or Rainer Maria Rilke. It's another personal favorite of mine. Hermann Hesse's poetry does the same thing. Mary Oliver, I feel like she's very much in that tradition. But there are just so many good ones. Another suggestion would be, as an artist, you might enjoy reading the poetry of Baudelaire. Now, it's a little dark. There's a lot of darkness in his poetry, but the imagery is so powerful. The imagery will capture you and make you stop you in your tracks a little bit. But yeah, I think the other thing is to find things that resonate with you in terms of subject matter, right? So if the urban grit is your thing, then maybe Bukowski. No, but I don't. Yeah, so it all depends on it depends on what your interests are. And but anyway, I feel like when I do that on my social media platforms, I feel like I'm just like planting a seed a little bit for people, and hopefully they it sticks and has an impact on them, makes them explore something. And the benefit also is that people send me things. They'll say, have you heard of this poet? Like I've traveled a lot in the world, and with social media, of course, you have access to people from everywhere. Right? It's pretty fantastic. That's one of the best things about it, actually. In fact, that may be the best thing about it. It's just the way that you can meet people from all around the world. And so whenever I meet somebody, if they're somebody from Spain, right, I'll say, well, who are you, like, what poets do you read? Like, who are the poets that you're interested in? And there will always be, of course, I know the famous ones like Lorca or whatever, but there will always be some obscure one that I'm like, oh, I never heard of them, and so I get introduced to something. Same with art. I mean, it's the same thing with art. With one of a great thing about social media is just discovering all these creative people around the world that are doing unbelievable things. I mean, I think it's an amazing time to be alive as an artist. In some ways, it's a very difficult time, but we can get into that later. So anyway, very long answer to
great answer. No, it's helpful, and I think you said something there that I thought was interesting. You said, this is not a direct quote. This is my interpretation of it, but that great art doesn't necessarily create really great answers or provide solutions. That forces you to ask better and better questions. And so it made me wonder if what's offensive to some people who don't understand, who don't have the very generous disposition that you have to see art that they don't understand, and to say, well, there's something wrong with my interpretation of it and the lens with which I'm looking at it. It makes me wonder if it's because that the more, I don't know, I don't want to target any one genre, but maybe the more minimalistic approaches to creative sculpture or painting or whatever fine art or even writing, that they offend people for the lack of detail in the questions asked.
Right. That's a really good way of putting it. Yeah, I think that's what that they get offended. Well, it's an interesting thing to be offended by something like that.
It is.
I mean, that's the first thing I would say about this line of thinking here is, it always surprises me when I see when I hear people speak about something that they saw in a gallery as if they're offended, that it exists, right?
Right.
I don't understand why you would be, unless it it's something, it violently attacked you or something, or like, I'm not sure what the offense is, but you do maybe hit on something there. It could maybe the reason why. No, okay. Let's back up, because there's another way in which sometimes people are offended, because it may offend some moral sense that they have.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so
For sure.
if it depicts something, that that is morally offensive to them, then I could see them being offended by the message, but. Like, so for example, if I were to walk into a gallery and I saw somebody who made artwork that was clearly racist, like it was like no bones about it, it would be unlikely to happen, right? That would be in a gallery. But let's just, for theoretical sense, let's say that happened. We walked into a gallery and there's something that was blatantly racist and intended to promulgate racist points of view. Now, we would be offended by the message, right? But it wouldn't be the art form itself. In fact, part of what our offense would be that they're violating the terms of art, which is that it's attempting to sway us to believe that what their offensive points of view are ones that we should all hold. That's propaganda. Right? That's what that is. And so we're in two ways we're offended there. One is that it's expressing a view that we find offensive, and we're also offended by the fact that it's trying to propagandize to us, right? So in that sense, I can see where people would be offended. But back to my original sort of joke about it, I don't know why people would be offended by a minimalist sculpture. That doesn't, it's obviously not, it's not propaganda in that regard,
right?
But and that's a whole other like actually really interesting topic. What's the difference between propaganda and art? But
that is great. I'd love to hear the answer to that too.
Well, I don't know if we could even come to an answer, but I think we could we at least sort of frame the question to give us a way of thinking about it. But back to what you said about people being offended when they encounter something they don't understand, and perhaps the reason is because the question is too subtly posed. Right? It's not question. The question that it poses requires a little bit too much of a background in the art form itself.
Totally.
Right.
Yep. Yeah.
Right? So for example, I mean, but this occurs in all kinds of things. So you'll maybe encounter somebody who's somebody who's older, doesn't know contemporary music, and they're like, rap music just sounds like all noise to me. It's like, well, that's what people said about rock and roll 60 years ago. Totally. They're like, oh, this is just noise. But once people start to understand the form and become conversant in the possibilities of what it can do, then the questions don't actually seem quite as simple, or they don't seem so subtle. They actually become much more obvious. Right. So, but this gets back a little bit to what I was saying about representational art forms, like what I do, which is that the form itself is not abstruse, right? It's really on the surface. Like people look at it and they can say, oh yeah, it's a figure. It's a person. It represents a human body, right? That so they don't have that disconnect with the subject matter that they would with something that feels a little bit over their head, right?
Totally.
And sometimes when artwork has that sense of it being over their head, part of the offense might be that they think, oh, these are elitist people, right? That you have to know the Mandarin terminology of this of this art form. And granted, there's a little bit of that in the art world. Okay, it does exist, especially if you're in academia. There's what's called art speak, right? Where sometimes you read those articles and you're like, I'm an educated guy, right? I have like a lot of education, right?
Right.
I've had 8 years of higher education under my belt, right? And sometimes I read those articles and I'm like, okay, I don't know what the heck this string of words is saying. I know each word. I know what each word means,
Right.
but I can't make sense of this sentence. So there can be that, but in the actual art itself, in the forms that people are physically creating, that's a totally different matter. But I think you hit on something there, that the way that when people feel, they walk out of the gallery, it's like, oh, that stuff is crap. That's not art. That's just a pile of bricks or whatever.
Right.
Right. Now it could just be that, like you said, the questions are fairly thin or subtle and almost like a thin veil, right? Or something, or like a lullaby, right? It's so quiet that you almost miss it, right? You almost miss the question. So now that's not, granted, I don't think that everything has the same validity. I'm not trying to say that there aren't people out there who really don't have anything to ask, don't have questions. I mean, but that's not for me to say. I mean, that's not for me. I'm not the arbiter of that. Because I'm sure in fact, one of the problems with doing representational artwork is that there are lots of people who would say that about me. Because they would say, well, you're just creating you're just making another figure. This has already been done.
Right.
And my answer to that is, well, the challenge for me is trying to find a new way to ask questions about an old form.
Yeah.
Like that's what makes it so engaging to me.
Yeah.
Anyway, so
that constraint.
Yeah. I mean,
but having those boundaries.
Everything has boundaries, though. That's the interesting thing about life. There's no such thing as total freedom. It doesn't exist. It just doesn't exist, no matter what anybody thinks. I listened to your interview with Dr. Strugler, and a lot of it was about the idea of radical independence, which I have been bringing up a lot with friends in the last few years, especially. Because I think that you see the detrimental effects of that way of thinking, but it also sends a really, I think, a false message about what it means to be creative, which is that creative has this connotation of being without restraint, like you said, like that has no boundaries. But the reality is, it has lots of boundaries. Boundaries of your own ability, boundaries of the form, boundaries of gravity. There are all kinds of constraints around you, and true freedom is actually finding new corners of that room that haven't been explored. Right? You think, okay, I'm stuck in this box. I'm stuck in this box of this form.
Sure.
Right? And doing representational art, of course, is unlike a lot of other contemporary art forms. It has a long history. I mean, it goes all the way back to the beginning. Actually, the earliest art forms that we know of, I'm sure there are probably other ones, but that we have record of, are representations, right? Whether they're a handprint on the wall or a representation of animals or something else in a cave.
Yeah,
they're representational. So with representational art, you have this vast history of imagery and objects that are in the room. So that's the box I'm in, and it's a very crowded room with a lot of things. But I still believe there are empty corners. I still believe there are empty spaces. Maybe somewhere under the couch or something. I don't know, but there's some corner that somebody hasn't explored yet, and so. So it doesn't. I don't see the constraint as a bad thing. I think it's actually an interesting challenge, and not even a challenge. That's not the right word, because that makes it sound like it's some sort of competition, or But it's not. It's not. It's. I see it as It's actually, for me, it's a really engaging line of inquiry, right? It's almost like the being a scientist and knowing that there's there are a lot of things like, for example, if I were to go and study medicine, what
Yeah.
I would be most interested in are the things that seem like the dark spaces that are kind of like,
Yeah.
where's that dark, what is that dark matter? You
Hmm.
know,
Yeah. Oh,
right?
for
We
sure.
know, yeah. So it's like that. But anyway, uh,
Absolutely.
I
Yeah.
don't know what was the question? What was the question that led to that monologue of mine? I don't
I
even know
think
where.
I think it was a conversation about being specific and asking better questions in making artwork. And
Yeah.
it makes me think about something that someone we talked about in our first and only phone conversation together. Something Frank Schaeffer said about art, that he doesn't like art that has a more complex ideological fulcrum than a complex artwork.
That's
So,
interesting.
in other
That's
words, and
interesting.
for those who don't speak art speak like Frank does, meaning there is some artwork that has, for instance, a painted line on the wall on a canvas, and that's simply that. And then there's a description about it that says, the line represents the boundaries between, light and darkness, and hope and hopelessness, and disparity, and whatever. It creates this deeper context, and tries to create something that a lot of people just don't see visually, that the artist themselves
Hmm.
didn't invest in the
Hmm.
artwork, right?
Hmm.
Is the critical end of that.
Interesting. Interesting. Well, that's actually that quote. I actually think we could unpack that into a lot of other forms.
Hmm.
Within a lot of other forms. So, for example, like when you said that, read that quote again. Could you
Yeah.
say it again?
Yeah, it was basically he doesn't like artwork that has a larger ideological fulcrum than in terms of its description,
Right. Right.
and more effort and energy put into that than the artwork itself, right? The description of the art,
Right. Okay, that's interesting. Because I would think that, actually it's the fairly the way I would interpret that,
yeah,
actually, it would be more in the lines of what we talked about earlier, which is propaganda,
yep,
where the
yes,
uh,
yeah,
where the message, the message is larger. Its purpose, its function, in terms of the message it's trying to send, is
mm-hmm.
is larger than the form itself. Now, the
Hmm.
only way, here's the thing though about that, and this is true even for, say, the minimalistic work of art that has a maximalist description. We won't, for either of those forms, we won't know whether the substance of the form itself has enough gravity to it, until history plays out, right?
Mm-hmm.
So for example, this is one of the things about artwork that had a clear propagandistic purpose to it, which is a lot of art in history, by the way. I mean, there's a lot of art that had things that we now look at in museums that was meant to send a particular political message to the citizens. And
Right.
but then, of course, over time, that political message dissipates. It disappears because the context changes, everything changes, and then
Right.
all you have left is the form. Now, if the form is made in such a way that the artist is thinking outside of that message,
Hmm.
that pointed specific message,
Hmm.
then the form will hold up, right? But we won't know until there's no way to predict which of those forms are going to have that, because the clear uh, and complex message layered on top of it,
Hmm.
that is more important than the form itself,
Hmm.
is the first thing that people are aware of. Okay, and particularly in things that are more propagandistic. But this is one of the reasons why I don't believe in the destruction of images and objects,
Hmm.
even the things that had a clear propagandistic purpose at one point,
Hmm.
because historical context change and historical meanings change, and that doesn't mean that we have to give them this. We can disempower them of their original propagandistic or political message
Totally.
by recontextualizing them,
Right.
and see if they can teach us other things, and see if they
Mm.
can help us ask other questions. But if you
Yeah.
erase them from history, they're no longer there for us to confront.
Right.
And I know that's a very, that would be a controversial point of view for some
Right.
people, because they would want to. I mean, what we're talking about, say, specifically, would be the Confederate monuments that people want. Some people want to destroy them.
Mhm.
I don't think we want to accept the message that they were trying to send when they erected those.
Right.
The message of power, racist power, and so forth. But at the same time, I think to destroy them would be to lose the opportunity to confront difficult questions about our past and about our
Yes.
present,
Totally.
and about what kind of future we want to have.
Absolutely.
I think the answer is to do one of two things. Either leave it in place and recontextualize it by surrounding with other objects that will force a conversation among those things.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Right.
Or you remove the thing and put it into another context
Exactly.
where the same operation happens, where then you are forced to ask questions about the meaning of that thing for our history as human beings, and for our values as in a present day society. But if you eliminate it, well, you've now lost the ability to have that conversation, and you've sublimated all of the feelings of the people who may have been attached to that thing. So now they're going to find another way to express it, right?
Sure.
So this is one of the reasons I'm against that kind of iconoclastic destruction of things, because you're eliminating a potential that existed with the thing. And in fact, many things lose their power pretty quickly when you do that. They simply do. I don't think anybody goes to the Vatican Museum to see the Augustus Prima Porta and then bow down to Caesar and be like, "Oh God, it's Caesar." Nobody's suddenly under the sway of Caesar because they see Caesar, because it was so long ago and it's in another context now. It's in a museum, right? Surrounded by other things. So
I do actually.
So I think it's
okay.
You do? Oh, okay, but
that's another story, I guess.
But that's a really important thing for us to think about as a culture, how we want to deal with that kind of matter. And here's the other thing about that quote that's really fascinating to me, is that, because I think it's actually there are a lot of layers to it. It doesn't necessarily have anything to do with any art form. It could actually have to do with just the artist's ability to ask questions through the medium, via the medium, right?
That's how I interpret it. Yeah.
Right. So in other words, it doesn't mean anything. It doesn't mean, he's not saying there that minimalism is an example of that. What he would be saying is there may be some minimalist artists who don't actually know how to use the form to open the viewer's mind to the very complex questions that are inside of it, right?
Yep.
So for a good example of that would be in the 19th century, Baudelaire, the poet that I recommended to you, who also happened to be an art critic. In the Salon of 1846, he wrote a review of the Salon of 1846 in Paris. And when he got to the sculpture section, the title of the essay portion for the sculpture section was "Why Sculpture is Boring." Now, he wasn't saying in the essay, he wasn't saying that sculpture itself is boring. He was talking about the review of that salon. And one of the things he points out is that the sculpture became a sort of empty vessel kind of form at that point in history, at least in the salon that he reviewed, not necessarily everywhere, of course. But he made the point that, you see a robed figure and the title is Paul. And he was saying the meaning of the piece came from the title, not from the object. He's like, you could change Paul. It could be Paul, and then take that black off and put Peter, right? It wouldn't make any difference, right? Like the object itself was a sort of bland illustration for a much bigger idea, right? But as soon as you took away the title or the idea, now the object had no living presence to it.
Yes.
In fact, and one of the things he said in that essay is that sculpture is a Carib art form. What he meant by Carib is, now this is kind of a controversial like passage because it's hard to interpret exactly what he meant, but what I think he meant by it was primal or primitive. And some people read that as a pejorative. He actually didn't mean it as a pejorative. He actually meant it as something that was the whole power of sculpture. At least, he was looking at representational sculpture. Although I think in general, sculpture has this essence behind it, which is what makes it so powerful. He wasn't using that as a pejorative. He was actually saying that that when sculptors lose the sense that the object is a living thing, right? That like in the primal mind, that it's almost animistic in its carrying of some spiritual vessel for something. Then you've just emptied of it. You've just made it boring. You've emptied it of its power. And that sculpture has this ability to be a living presence in the mind of the viewer.
Oh wow!
And so that's what he was saying that sculptors by that point in the midpoint of the 19th century in France had sort of lost that. They lost their way, and of course Rodin kind of forcefully brought all that back. But there were a lot of people before him that paved the way. But he's in some ways the first modern artist because of that, or contemporary artist, you could say. Sure. But anyway, that getting back to the Frank Schaeffer quote, that I think the concept there applies to any art form, and the real thing is to be aware of it as an artist yourself. Are you putting the cart before the horse when you're working? You've probably seen this with artists where they'll make something and they slap a label on it, and you think, well, those two things are disjointed. They don't seem to have anything to do with each other. Totally. Right.
For sure.
And so ultimately that's an individual artist's responsibility and not the form itself.
Right. Yeah. I really don't enjoy the process of naming artwork, and it almost, it's almost like I did the creative work and you can name it if you'd like. I almost want to empower the collector to make that decision for me. Do you ever have that impulse?
Okay, so I love this. Okay, this is a really good topic because I agree with you. I've gotten better at that in my own mind in terms of my comfort level with it.
Sure.
But I know exactly what you're talking about because I have the same problem for many, many years. And in fact, a lot of the titles of my early pieces from, not earlier pieces, but pieces from maybe 10 years ago, where I almost saw them as placeholders. Here, and so since I brought up Rodin, let's use him as an example, right? He would change the titles all the time. Yeah. He just didn't and of course that sounds wishy-washy. It's like, well, he doesn't know what it means. It's like, well, yeah, right. Exactly. He doesn't know what it means. That's what's great about it. It's revealing its meaning to him over time. Yeah. And as it's revealing its meaning, he suddenly is realizing, oh no, this isn't what I thought it was. This is something else. In fact, I think that's one of my discomfort with titles and the dilemma with titles was, I think that's where the origin of it is, that I was hesitant to place a meaning on it because I still didn't know what it meant to me. Yeah, but I was still in the same way that a viewer is discovering its meaning. Yeah. I'm discovering its meaning in the act of making it. Yes, and so I need time to live with it. And unfortunately, the only problem with this now, of course, is cataloging. Because then when you're in a gallery, and then if you're in a museum, now there's a cataloging of this thing that you lose a little bit of that ability. Although I have thought at times of just writing to say, hey, could you just I'm changing the title of this piece. Oh, you know what? Actually, I have a good example of this. I have a really good example. I forgot about this. This happened last year. A collector wrote to me who bought a piece from me probably 15 years ago, maybe 13 years ago. So I was showing at John Pence Gallery at the time. I was showing at John Pence Gallery in San Francisco, It's now closed. John retired. This is before I was with Louis K. Mizell Gallery. I sold this piece through John, and they were in Florida, and these two guys, these collectors, bought it from me, or from the gallery, and I had one, and I don't remember the title back then. This is how bad it is, right? But he wrote to me last year, and he said, "Oh, unfortunately, my partner died, and but I happened to be looking on your website, or it was on social media or something, and he said, I saw that like the title of the piece that we bought is completely different than the title when we bought it." And I was like, "Oh,
That's embarrassing.
yeah." I was like, "Yeah, I forgot to inform you that I changed the title for in
Oh my
the
gosh.
public."
That's a
good
familiar
example.
story. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. No, that's a good example of that, because its meaning, I was still discovering what it meant to me.
Yeah.
I hadn't had time to really live with it. And now I think I've gotten better at living with it in the moment of making it,
Yeah.
in a way that reveals its some of its essential meanings to me. So titling has gotten a little easier. But if you look at I would go back what I was going to say a little earlier. If you look at some of the older work, like they're just simple titles, like the name of the model or something.
Right.
Because I was, at the time, I was just like, I was in a rush. I had to get them in the gallery, and I hadn't had time to title them the way I wanted. And so, I don't know if Liz at the gallery would be too happy if I start writing to her now and say, "Hey, we need to change all these titles." But I think that gets easier with time. Honestly, I think it
That's
gets
good.
easier.
That's good news. I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah. I mean, part of it is here's the other thing about it for me, is that, at the time, when I the piece I'm talking about, that now I feel like they have placeholder titles. They're more taxonomy than they are any kind of revelation of meaning. Those titles, part of the reason that they were like that is because I was exploring a whole new line of thinking in my work. And so it was a new direction in my artwork at the time. And so when I was taking that new direction, that new path, I was still in the process of finding what it was about, right? What I was looking for, what the questions were going to be for myself and for the viewer.
Right.
And so I was, I was in the midst of that happening while I was discovering a new form for myself. If that makes sense. So now that I've been doing it long enough,
it does.
It's just now I kind of know what the parameters are, and so when I'm in the middle of working on something, I'm keyed into it a little more quickly. And sometimes when you start a new form, that happens. I think that's probably pretty common.
Yeah.
That's why so many people, they'll have untitled number one, untitled number two.
Oh, that's me for the past 8 years.
Yeah, and there's nothing. To be honest, though, there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, it's nothing. No, I don't think there is. I mean, any more than there's anything wrong with, like, you've gone to galleries and you've seen artwork that has like a title that's like 3 sentences long or something, whatever. There's nothing wrong with that either.
Yeah, sure.
There's no rule about any of this.
Right.
And I mean, it's also, it's a kind of funny, curious thing about all this. This is a very contemporary problem we're talking about, because nobody, when Michelangelo was carving the Pietà, they were like, well, okay, what's the title of this thing? Like, he didn't need to give it a title. Like, the title emerged over time because it was the subject matter and the subject matter told the viewer what the content was. So because it fit within an environment that told you what its meaning, what it was going to be about in terms of its narrative quality, not necessarily its larger meanings, but it didn't need a title, right? Like, you didn't need to write Pietà on there, it's like somebody else gave it that title. And so it's, but this is maybe what Baudelaire was getting at, right? He was saying, well, this is all becoming kind of boring. You're just making a bunch of robed figures and you just place placards, Aristotle, Socrates, St. Paul,
Right.
So whatever that may be.
Yeah.
And so I would say, for people who have trouble titling the work,
Right.
I wouldn't stress about it. I don't think it's, I think you just, and titles are changeable. I don't see why, I don't know why they wouldn't be.
Right.
Why does it have to be fixed any more than the questions that it asks have to be fixed? Right.
Yeah.
There's a great story from the Old Testament. I actually think that illustrates this really well, which is the story of the brazen serpent. So for people who don't know the story of the brazen serpent in the Old Testament, or I can't remember which books the story is in. It must be Exodus, right? The brazen serpent. So the Israelites were at one point, they're wandering in the desert and they think they're getting somewhere, and they end up circling around, and all these things happen to them. And at one point, they're attacked by asps, right? These poisonous snakes. And God tells Moses to make this brazen serpent. A brazen serpent was a bronze. It's basically bronze. It's a serpent intertwined on a staff, right? And that the people, when they looked at the brazen serpent, they were that would heal, that would inoculate them, so to speak, from the poison of the asp. But the point of the brazen serpent, the point of it was that the serpent, the sculpture, the object itself, was supposed to direct their attention toward God, right? Like they were supposed to be. It's supposed to remind them that there was a source of refuge outside of their own resources, right? So anyway, so that what happened though is at the end of the 40 years of wandering, the people started to worship the brazen serpent, right? So its meaning changed. Its meaning and its function changed. And then Moses melted it down, right? It's like, well, this thing isn't working anymore. It's not there. So that meanings change over time. Another good example of that would be, say, Greek sculptures, right? If you go to a museum and you see a marble, figure, Greek sculpture there, first of all, it's not the original piece. It's a Roman copy done, anywhere from 300 to 500 years after the original, which would have been bronze, and would have been very different. I mean, it would have been probably much more naturalistic, different color, had glass eyes, and all of these features that would have made it much more realistic to the viewer, or much more veristic is a better word.
That's a good
one. Of course, yeah. And what happened, of course, is that those things were meant to be seen in this sort of primal way that Baudelaire was talking about, which is that they were embodiments. They were like icons, that they were imbued with the spirit of of a thing, right? They weren't just representations of something, that they were literal vessels for some kind of spiritual presence, right?
Right.
And so, but of course, once those they got copied in marble by the Romans 300 to 500 years later. Then the bronzes were melted down. Now these marbles are sitting in a museum. Well, what do they mean now? They don't, we don't see them the way a Greek person would have seen them. The meaning has shifted. The context has shifted, and the material has shifted. The belief systems around what art has completely shifted, and so their meaning shifted. So I expect, maybe in 1,000 years, somebody will find one of my sculptures and they'll just name it something else. They'll just come up with it'll be some goddess or god that they attach meaning to. I don't know, but
right.
It's a fascinating thing. But
so, Brian, you are a depth, you're a very deep well of knowledge, and it's obvious that you don't just create art; you think about art. But I'm sort of curious what it is that you think about outside of art, or maybe what it is that you do when you're not sculpting.
Well, there isn't a lot that I do when I'm not sculpting. So I do spend a lot of time. One of the things about sculpture is it's very labor intensive, as you know. You're carving wood, right? So it's a labor intensive form. And when the kind of work I do, I work in clay, I make the molds, cast in bronze. Yes, it's a very labor intensive process. So it does eat up a lot of my time, which is fine because I love doing it, right? In fact, I wish I could do more. so when I'm not doing that, I do teach classes to help supplement my income, so that when sales of my work are low, I can, I'll teach courses, and I like to travel to do those if I can. We can get into that a little bit later, a little more detail about my teaching
Would love
part
that.
of my career, because I think it's an important thing. We can discuss the business end of being an artist.
Oh, for
I do
sure.
that. I do teach, but when I'm not teaching or sculpting, working in the studio, I have a dog. I go for walks with my dog. I like to engage with nature. I like to go for walks in the woods, or even if I only have time just to walk down the street and come back. I live in a nice location. It's very beautiful out here, and so I do like to take walks. I like to be in nature because uh, my mind is very busy. I'm thinking a lot, probably too much, right? I ruminate. I ruminate in the wrong ways sometimes,
Mm,
and when one of the things about being with other animals, I like to say it that way because we are animals, with other parts of nature. I become aware of the manner in which the rest of nature is just being, right. It's not constantly trying to fix everything, or find a solution for every problem. Human beings have this insatiable urge to just for progress, or whatever that might mean, right.
yep.
And it's very easy to get caught up in that. Even as an artist, you're always trying to make progress in whatever, in some manner, and solve some problem in your work or in your life. And uh, sometimes you need to just have a meditative practice that can quiet the mind, right? So for me, nature is a good way to do that. I do. I don't meditate a lot, but I have, in the last year, I've been taking up a little bit more meditation practice. But I'm not. I don't do it as much as I probably should, because I think it's very good for me. I do read, like I said. I'll read quite a bit. I don't have a lot of activities that I do outside of sculpting. I just don't have a lot of time for it. When I was younger, I would, do things like skiing or whatever, but I don't do that stuff anymore. I just don't have the time for it. What I've tried to do, this is one thing that I think could be helpful for people, is I've tried to find ways that my obsession with art making is can also be relieved by combining with other things. So, for example, getting back to teaching, I started to get requests to teach different parts of the world quite a while ago, and I found that it's really, really helpful to me when I travel to, say, South Africa or Brazil, or I usually do classes in Rome every summer, although COVID's kind of stopped all that. And it's really helpful because I'm engaged with art, but I'm also engaged with people, and I'm participating in some communal experience, and learning about new people, new cultures, new ways of looking at the world, and new places, new food. That for me is probably the most enjoyable thing that I get to do outside of sculpting. It's really good for my mental health to be able to do that. So those are, and then of course sometimes I'll watch films. I usually watch one film a week, but I don't watch television. I don't own a television.
Good for you.
I try to look, these devices, these things
Oh
are
God.
are way too demanding as it is. And I realized years ago that if I wanted to make any kind of progress as a creative person, I had to be very selective about what I would spend my time with. And television was like first thing to go. It was like, I don't need it. Don't need it. And in fact, I think it's probably pretty unhealthy, and to a large degree. Not that there aren't good things on television. I'm not like disparaging the creative endeavors of people in that medium, because there are some like amazing things that people are doing.
Oh, for sure.
But I don't. Again, it's like what I was saying earlier. I have I have a certain bandwidth, right? And
Right.
I can't, I'm trying to fit too much into it. It's
Mm.
difficult. So, but I do love film. I
Mm.
was, I was a big film buff many years ago. Not like it used to be. I mean,
Mm.
I watched so many films when I was younger. I was a big film buff. So I do like films. I'll maybe watch one film a week. And like I said, take a walk every day with my dog. And I have daughters, so I have two teenage daughters. So there's a lot of driving back and forth to schools and activities. Uh,
What are their
but that's about
ages?
it. 14 and 16.
Okay.
So
Yep.
so although they live with their mother, but I have a unique situation here where my ex-wife and I live right across the street from each other. So
Wow.
she's right there with the girls, and we're we when we got divorced, we made a decision that we were even if we weren't going to be married, we're going to keep our family together.
Mm.
And that sounds strange to people, maybe, but I don't care what other people think. Honestly, I just don't care. And they might think it's strange, but this was the reality for us. Was we wanted to maintain a family for our daughters, and so despite the fact that we're divorced, we're close proximity.
Mm.
We talk every day.
Mm.
There's no cut. We never had a custody agreement. Nothing. We never
Mm.
had. I mean, the entire thing. Like you hear horror stories about divorces where it cost them $60,000, whatever. The whole thing was
Right.
basically like $1,000 just to file the paperwork, and that was it. We were done.
Wow.
No custody agreement. We share like a lot of things together. We have a garden. I have a, this is an old farm. So I have a garden here and we
Oh,
garden
cool.
together. So, we've worked really hard to maintain the continuity for
Wow.
them. So that does takes, obviously having kids and maintaining that, those relationships takes, time, but that's a full schedule right there. You don't really, there's not much room for too many other things. Uh, but
No doubt.
obviously, over time, I'm sure some of those interests will shift and things will
Hmm.
change, and
Yeah.
more space will open up for other activities, I'm sure.
Mm.
But there's like I have a laundry list of things that I would love to do. Like my daughter's learning to play the guitar right now.
Yeah.
Um, she plays piano and now she's starting to play the guitar. And I'm just watching her. I'm like, I wish I could play the guitar.
Yeah.
I would love to do it. I just don't have the time to. I don't know where I would fit it into my day.
Oh, dude,
Uh,
you're talking to the wrong guy to give you advice on that because I have the same problem with it. I love music so much. It's a big part of my life. Well, it
hmm.
has been in the past, but the more I've dived deep into the world of sculpture and teaching and all of what I do now, it's like there's hardly any time to pick
Hmm.
that thing up.
Yeah. What else? So what do you do when you're not in the studio sculpting and making your art? What activities do you find enrich your life and give you sort of relaxation from the labor of sculpting?
Right. Well, I'm pretty social, so I like to spend time with friends and family for sure.
Mm.
That's key. But I have a special affinity for the sauna. there's,
I
this
think if
sounds
I had a sauna, I would have a
yeah.
special affinity too.
Yeah, no, I don't have one. I'm in the process of building one.
Oh,
I'm so
cool,
into the
cool.
idea, but I hardly have time for that either. So there's just a foundation sitting on the other side of my house right now. um, for one. And a student of mine actually threatening to come down from South Ohio to help me finish the construction of it. And so I'm kind of using that as an excuse for now, as a placeholder excuse for why I haven't finished it. But I love sitting in a hot sauna. I love reading as well. I'm a big fan um, uh, of reading, and I like to read. You know, I'm pretty diverse in the type of books I like. I would say I'm definitely lacking in poetry, and so I'm glad for your suggestions. But I love playing music, and it's something that is so vulnerable for me to do in front of people that
Mm,
and even though I performed a lot, I've done a lot of
mm,
performing in my life.
mm,
It's so hard to do it confidently, and there's a sort of thought process, and that leads me to a question I had for you,
mm,
actually, that I think leads to a good performance, and that is, almost less of a linear thought process and more of a sort of a dreamlike state, or a state of sort of almost unity with the music itself and the audience. And it's a trance-like position where definitely endorphins are there. You sort of feel this warmth of presence and in the moment, and you're not worried about playing a wrong note. You're not worried about if you're slightly flat, which I usually am when I sing. Don't know what that is, but I just have a tendency to be just a little flat a lot of times. But there isn't that concern, and you listen back to those recordings, and usually those are some of the better ones. And so I wondered in your sculpture, because for me in sculpture, there are, it's as in songwriting, you toggle back and forth between the critical, the part of your brain that says, this is not quite right, make an adjustment, and the emotive, flow state part of your brain, that right creative brain that says to just move and to act. So when you're creative, at risk of making this too general of a question, when you're being creative, when you're engaged specifically in sculpture, do you find that you're best when you're toggling back and forth, you're in one state or another state? What does that look like for you?
Yeah, that's a great question. You mentioned flow, like Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi's concept of flow.
Yeah, I just picked that up.
You probably have that book. Yeah. That's a great question, and it's a fairly deep one because it goes to education as well. How do you get people to the point where they can enter that state of flow, where the thinking mind, the conscious mind disappears, where the ego disappears, and you're at one with the medium, and your self-awareness disappears.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right. It's that's what that is really. When you're
Totally.
in the analytic mode, what you're really in is a self-aware mode. Okay. And I find that when things are working best, I'm not in that self-aware mode. I'm not in the analytic mode. But I still, there are still moments when I do have to toggle back to that.
Totally.
Okay. What's interesting about that is that with experience, the more experience you have with a medium or an instrument and a material, the less you have to go into the self-aware or analytic mode, because it's operating the background, right? It's already been trained to look for the solutions without breaking them down into steps. Okay. It's a lot like riding a bike, right? When you first learned, this is an analogy. People who have listened to me talk in other podcasts, they're going to hear this one again. But the analogy, it's an easy analogy to understand, because most people know how to ride a bike. When you're learning to ride a bike, you're thinking about steering, you're thinking about pedaling, you're thinking about balancing, you're thinking about looking ahead, you're looking at the right, you're looking for things, the obstacles in the road. Your brain is toggling between all of those activities. But once you become proficient, you're not thinking, okay, steer, okay, wait, pedal, wait, balance, right? All of those things are happening simultaneously without any language entering into the process.
Yes.
Okay. But any athlete or anybody performing a very complex physical action knows that they can get out of tune. Right. They can start to, it's like slowly a habit will start to creep in, and they'll start to, where they could be a runner or a wrestler or whatever. And they start to have these aches, or they don't feel right. Things are not as efficient. They're not performing at their peak level. They start to regress a little bit. And then they think they have to start analyzing again. So what am I doing? What did I do? Now, what am I doing? Where did I start to get off track? They have to go back into it's the same thing with art making. They go back, so there are moments when there are times when I'm when I think I'm in the flow state, but really I'm just being lazy.
Yes. Oh, come on. Yeah.
And I've developed a bad habit.
Yep.
right? And then I have to, but what happens with experience though, is you start to recognize it when it happens more.
Right.
You start to see it a little bit more clearly. You start to become aware of the need to be aware. And then once you do that, then you've created, because one of the things about the flow state that that Csikszentmihalyi points out is that to get into the flow state, it has to be there are a couple of requirements. It has to be a complex cognitive activity. Okay. Well, I mean, truth is everything we do is cognitive, but it has to be a complex activity. Okay. It has to be an activity that you are fully engaged with, so that you're present with it intensely. Okay. And the other thing is it requires a level of proficiency. So it's very difficult to get into the flow state if you're not proficient.
Yeah.
Okay. Because when it's a complex activity, when it's complex, just like I said, like it's like riding, like sculpting to me is like riding 5 bikes at once, right? It's literally, it's that complex in my opinion. I think it's we can talk about that in terms of its psychological, perceptual, and cognitive functioning when sculpting what I mean by its complexity.
Right.
But the reality is you're juggling a lot of things at once. And when you're learning, when you're not proficient at it, you can be really intensely involved in the process, but you don't know, you're not aware of all of these other things that have to be happening at the same time. Right. And so this is why if you want to do something that has that level of complexity, whether it's playing an instrument or a particular sport, like physical activities are incredibly complex, which is why athletic endeavors are so fascinating to watch, because it's incredible to see human beings that are able to perform these very subtle and complex activities all simultaneously at once without even thinking. It just happens, right? Any of those activities, whether they are solving a math problem or sculpting, playing an instrument, athletic activity, those things require training, because the only way you can get into flow state is to understand all of the components of that activity that require your attention to master them.
Yep.
Right.
Right.
When I'm in the flow state, when I get into the flow state sculpting, that's when that's the best feeling. That's the best. Yep. I mean, the analytical phase is a corrective thing. It's when it's again, the analogy of an activity. It's like, my swing is off or something, just like the angle of everything's off a little bit. Like, like my approach is, I just got a little lazy in my approach at the beginning, and then I realized it, like an alarm bell goes off and it's like, oh wait, I went off track, and then I need to go back to the analytic mode. But the better you get at something, the less that happens. The quicker you get into flow state, the longer you can stay there. But inevitably anyone, even the most proficient people, do have moments where they have to be analytical, and the intervals can vary depending on the activity. Right. So I could be like in flow for half an hour, and I just like time disappears, and then 10, 20 minutes of like analyzing, say, okay, wait, what's going on here? And also here's the other thing. Every aspect of the sculpting process is different. So there are different stages, right? So for example, this is a really simple example. The analytical part of the activity needs to be done at the beginning to set yourself up for the flow state. So I'll give you an example. Like I'm doing a figure, right?
Yeah, I needed to hear this right now. It's like a counseling session.
It's really helpful. Yeah, see, what? Just this is an aside, but this is one of the things I love about teaching, right? And this is going to sound like a very selfish reason to teach, but I always advocate to like my students. So I always tell them, like, if you want to get better at what you're doing, just teach it for a little bit.
Oh, sure.
Because one of the great things about teaching is it makes you very aware of the things that you need to be telling yourself. So what I just tell you, and you're like, I need to hear it too, right? It's like, because we're all we're all in the same boat in that regard. The things that I tell my students are things that I need to hear.
Yeah.
They're things that I need to be conscious of at moments too.
Sure.
Anyway, what I was going to say is I'll give you an example. If I'm sculpting a figure in clay and plastilines, let's say it's a half scale figure, like a 34 inch tall figure. Now, obviously, now it has to have a metal armature inside, aluminum armature inside to hold the clay. And, I'm using a particular model and I want to use the model's proportions. Say it's a model that's 5'8", right? So I'm going to make a half scale. It's going to be 34 inches tall. And I want it to have their particular proportions. Now, I can't just jump into flow state and be like, okay, I'm going to start like it doesn't make any sense. Like I need to measure out my armature wire. I need to create all of the structural systems that are going to allow me to get into the flow state once I start putting that clay on. Right. Now, obviously, for a beginner, they have to do a lot more analytical work. They need to be constantly doing the analytical work. They're not going to get into flow state. It's just not going to happen. And for them to expect it would be, I think, misguided. They're gonna need to set the groundwork of all of that procedural part of making something in order to get to the point where they're proficient enough that they can be in flow state. But even for somebody who's advanced, there are preparatory things you have to do. Just like a singer, an opera singer is not just going to walk out on stage and start belting out. They have to warm up.
Right.
Yeah, they have to warm up.
Yep.
And you have to tune your instrument. You have to do. These are all and I think these are built into any of those. Those highly complex activities that we talked about. But when I start something, I do make sure that I understand what I'm going to be doing before I start. I have it all set up, and I'm not going to make some ridiculous error because I just I don't need to do any. I'll just start sculpting, Yeah. That's
imagine building an armature in complete flow state, just however I feel at the moment.
Just however it feels.
This arm should be 14 inches and this one should be 3. I feel like.
Yeah, exactly. It feels right. Now, obviously, every art form is different. So what I'm saying is I'm applying specifically to mine, right? Whereas somebody who does something that's a little less structured, so to speak, they may have a different way of approaching that. And I'm always curious to read about how people would approach their work. Say like an abstract expressionist painter, right? It's like Joan Mitchell, right? He's one of my favorite. I mean, I think she's the greatest abstract expressionist painter of all of them. But
Joan, like Joan.
Yeah, Mitchell. Yeah, Joan Mitchell. Yeah. Jackson Pollock, I don't think is near as good as her, even though he's one of the originators of the form. Nevertheless, I still think she's better.
How dare you?
That's my very biased opinion. I'm just saying what I like. That's all. Actually, there's no actual measure of these things.
Right.
But at any rate, so I'd be very. She's not, of course, not with us, but it would be fascinating for me to see somebody like that working and see, because they're very much in the flow state when they're doing it, right? Because but it's not as if it's not as if those people didn't have a structure. People say, well, Jackson was just flinging paint. Well, it wasn't just flinging paint. It wasn't just, that's not, when you look at the paintings, what makes them fascinating is there is a kind of order to them, right? There is a sort of an organizing principle to them. Now, how they actually got themselves to go from to having this organizing principle, that parameter that they create for themselves, and then go in the flow state would probably be different than from what I do. In the same way that somebody who's a pianist would have a different way of setting themselves up to start a composition on the piano.
Right.
But nonetheless, I think it's a common experience that artists have, that toggling that you talked about. It's a really great question. I think it's something that people who are beginning really need to hear, because it's not things like when I'm teaching a class and I'm doing a demo. In fact, this happened to me last year. I taught a tech class here, and toward the end, the last day of the class, or second to last day of the class, on my demo, I did something. I just like took this. I did all this structural work on the figure that I was making, and then I just took a couple tools and I like within like 30 seconds, I went over an area, and it suddenly felt like really alive. And the one guy who was there, he said, I don't know, that's just magic. That's just like, it looked like magic to him. But then I stepped away and I said, look, it's not actually, it looks like magic. But the reason I demonstrated that to you was to prove my point, which is that if you understand how to structure things, and if you get these principles down, then when you get to that point where you're just like, everything just sort of flows together, it looks like magic.
Yeah.
But it's not. It's because you've done all that other work behind the scenes to get you to that point. And so it's good for people to hear this because I think people get frustrated with that. They don't understand how those two operations of your brain are actually interdependent. You know, you can't have this is there's a great visual depiction of this that Michelangelo often discussed is the pyramid and the serpent. The Hobart actually made an illustration of it. I don't have it in front of me, but I can show you. Basically, it's just a simple graphic thing. It's a pyramid, which represents structure. And in the middle of it, there's a serpent, which represents flow. Right? And those two things are constantly present. Like whenever people talk about improvisation in music, improvisation doesn't mean just like randomly playing stuff, man. Just like whatever notes you hit are fine. Like I don't play music. If I improvise, it's not going to sound like improvisation. It's going to sound like ignorant noise making, right? You know, right? And at the same time, improvisation is not simply following the tonal structure verbatim, right? It's structure, flow, at the same time. But you cannot get yourself into that flow state without really repeating the steps that are broken down into the various elements, you know, right? And mastering those. Like you know music, you have to know your scales, you have to know your chords, you have to know chord changes, you have to know, right? This is all part of it. It's the same with sculpting. So
Right. And even if you don't have a very specific knowledge of what you're doing, you can curate your own understanding of a subject, and then have your own sort of like dictionary, your own personal dictionary. And so it brings me to a thought about teaching. You're a teacher, and a great one at that. What does it mean to help someone in a situation where sometimes the presence of an instructor is enough to make someone feel disempowered and not empowered?
Yeah, right.
So how do you do that? How do you do that in a way that's genuine and not fake?
Yeah, that's probably the hardest thing about teaching, actually, because, well, there's a lot we could talk about here, and we could go off on a lot of tangents. But let me start by answering that by telling you a story. When I first started teaching, I was a professor for 11 years. I'm not a professor anymore. All the teaching I do now they're short workshops. Generally short, 1 week to 2 week, sometimes a 3-day workshop. They're generally maximum 2 weeks, intensives. But when I first was a professor, I think it was the second year I was a professor, I had a student in my sculpture 1 class, and it was a representational sculpture class, and he was a little older student. He was probably like his mid-late 20s, starting as a freshman, right? And I had an assignment for them, and it was a figure assignment that they had to sculpt. And this was toward the end of the year, so they had already been in class for a while. And so I had this assignment for them, and 2 days later we were going to look at it in class. Okay, and in the interim, I thought, well, I'll make one I'll do one as well. Like I'll get ones like their assignment wasn't to finish it. They were just supposed to start this thing. Okay. Right. So I thought, okay, I'll start one as well. Well, I finished it in like a day, right? I brought it into class.
You jerk.
And, yeah. Well, this is what I learned. See, this is where I learned this is why I'm telling the story, because, this, and I don't remember his name. It doesn't matter anyway, but, everybody had their assignments there, and we looked at them, and I had mine there. And at the end of the class, and I was just leaving mine there in the classroom as an example for them to show them like what I wanted them to do. Right. And he came up to me. He's like, did you do this before? Like, when did you do this? And I said, oh, I did it yesterday in my studio. Right. And he was just like, he just got so dejected.
Poor guy. Yeah.
Poor guy, I know, exactly. And what's the worst part about it, and then what I felt so bad about, is he dropped out. He never came back.
Wow.
Yeah,
I wasn't expecting that.
It's a real extreme example, because what he said, he looked at it and he said, I don't think I could ever get that good.
That's so unfortunate.
And it was really like bothered me for a long time afterward, because I was just like, damn, I had it was the wrong approach, because I set a bar too high in terms of, without explaining it. Right. It wasn't so much that it rather than inspire him, it discouraged him. Right. And so that's what you're asking. How do you show them like a very high level of proficiency, and use that as inspiration, and without discouraging them. And and of course, now obviously personality has a lot to do with this. Like, I never really even got to know him well enough to know what his personality was. And who knows, maybe he went on to another school and succeeded. I don't remember the name, but I felt really bad about it, because I thought, okay, I didn't do my job there. My job was to inspire him. And here was the other thing. And this is actually one of the bigger dangers in my mind when it comes to representational art forms. Here's the bigger danger, is I didn't clearly send the message at some point in that year with him that the goal was not to be able to sculpt like me. That's not what the goal is when somebody takes a class with me. Now they may think that. They may want to learn, they may want to do exactly, but that's actually not the goal of education. My job, and here's my mantra for teaching. This is the way that I distill down the definition of what it means to be a teacher. Your job as a teacher is to help a student understand the world and find their place in it. That's it. Like, your job is not to make them into something that you believe is right. Or that's not your job. Your job is to be attentive to their individual characteristics and personality and way of looking at the world. Right. What you're trying to do is help them see that they have a unique way of looking at the world and asking questions about it, and then representing that observation and those questions in a form. Right. So what I didn't clearly communicate to him at some point was, look, you don't have to sculpt like this. There are millions of ways of making art. Right. And in fact, not only there are millions of ways of making art, there are billions of possibilities beyond that we don't even know about, because not everybody's doing it. And so that's, to answer your question, the difficulty is in trying to impart some knowledge or skill or approach without making it seem as if that is the end all and be all. That if they do that, they're going to be an artist. Right. And that's not true. That's not true at all. And so that experience always stuck with me, because I was beginning professor. I mean, I think it was my second year. In fact, I'm positive it was my second year there. And so I was relatively young, and I was learning as well. And so that stuck with me, because I realized I failed in some level to give him that understanding and to help him find his place. Like, I
Right.
didn't help him understand the world of art, and I didn't help him find his place in it. He got discouraged because he saw something that was so far above where his understanding was, and that he would never reach it. Right.
Right.
And that wasn't even the goal. That's
Yeah.
not even the goal.
Right.
But now, granted, it's very tough. It's a little. Here's the one thing I would twist to that I would add is, when I was a professor, of course, I had 4 years in which I could impart those ideas to people. So I could, I had much more. When you get to know somebody over time, they're in your department, they take multiple classes with you, and you have time to talk to them after class and so forth. You have a lot more opportunity to perform that act of education that I described, to help a person understand the world and find their place in it. When I'm teaching a workshop, of course, I don't necessarily have that opportunity. In a week, I'm not going to have enough time to learn the personalities of 8 to 12 people and
Exactly.
see where they want to go and what they're, and say, hey, you're good at this. Why don't you go there? That's actually, you seem to have a natural affinity for this sort of thing. That's not within the purview of a course of that length, but nonetheless, I do now when I teach workshops, I do impart that experience, so that I say to them, look, we're all engaged in art making for the same fundamental reason, which is that we are human beings trying to make sense of our experience and trying to give that some sort of form. And wherever this takes you is really going to be an individual path. I never wanted people to sculpt like me. I always wanted to just make sure that that I imparted bits of information that they could transfer anywhere they wanted to go.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
Right. That's the key thing. That's the key thing in my mind.
Yep.
But unfortunately, and this is getting back to what I was saying about one of the difficulties of teaching something that's so clearly defined as representational painting or drawing or sculpture, is everybody already knows what that is, right? They know when they see a good, they when you say we're gonna do a figure sculpture, right? That's the goal, is to make a decent figure sculpture. So, or to at least have some that they will access some knowledge that they can then use later on. Sure. So it's not like a free and open creative experience. Everybody's like, okay, this is our model, this is what we're going to sculpt, and here's how we're going to proceed. Right. But nonetheless, even despite that, like I said, when I'm teaching a course like that, a workshop like that, I do at moments throughout the experience, I'll interject that. I'll obviously try to give them concrete information that's employable. Yep. But I also try to transmit to them the notion that those concrete skills are also transferable. Right. And they can help you see the world in a new way and maybe open up other doors for you. So that's my approach to it. It's not, teachings can be difficult that way because you have lots of personalities and different backgrounds, experiences, skill levels, different mixtures of talents. Everybody has some sort of talent, right? Something. Sure. It may not be.
Everyone's a genius.
Yeah,
in some capacity.
Well, I don't think. Well, exactly. Or no one is. Maybe no one is a genius. Sure. I actually kind of think that's a really that's a strange modern notion, the idea of the individual genius, right? Now obviously there are people who exhibit the great accomplishment within a field, like an Einstein or a Newton or a Michelangelo, right? But the reality is that we're very intelligent as a species collectively, but individually we're not that smart, right? If you think about it, right? And obviously Einstein is the sort of quintessential one, or a Leonardo da Vinci, right? But but the truth is that what made them geniuses in our mind is something somewhat incomprehensible.
Uh,
That
yeah.
they're a product of more than just their biological inheritance. They're a
Yeah.
product of some other larger flow of things that are happening in
Mm,
the experience of the human species. And
mm,
uh, uh, it's beyond just the fact that they have this structure of their brain, this one thing that's like in their brain,
right.
uh, and yes, because in different circumstances, maybe he would have just been a middling mathematician. Who knows? We don't know.
Right.
In fact,
Right.
one of the things he always talked about was how much like fairy tales and creativity helped him.
Mm,
It wasn't simply a linear process of learning some mathematical principles and then a genius like, okay, we're just gonna. No, it's like an inevitable thing. They're going to discover this.
mm,
There are lots of influences and information that could come into their experience as a human being,
mm.
that can make them appear to be so much more above us.
Yeah.
But it's more. I think a lot of that has to do with, like, one of my heroes is Giordano Bruno, who was burned at the
Giovanni.
stake. Bruno,
Mm.
Giordano Bruno.
Oh.
Yeah. Uh, is so ahead of his time, and but he's a bit brash. But a lot of it was he what makes a person like that is so far ahead of their time. It's hard to know. It's not. I don't think if you could somehow empirically measure his intelligence level, is probably at a very high level compared to most people. But there have been lots of people like that. There's no
Mm,
guarantee that they're gonna make some great discovery.
mm.
It's a fascinating thing,
Yeah.
uh, and a part of what I find makes me a little uncomfortable about the idea that of individual genius is this sort of what we alluded to a little earlier, the
Uh,
idea of radical independence, right?
mhm.
And that,
Mm.
like, if we just took like one of those people with a high IQ and we just put them in a room, they're gonna solve all the problems. It doesn't work like that. It doesn't work like that.
It's
It's a
true.
communal thing that we're engaged in,
Yeah.
and so uh, and it doesn't acknowledge all the antecedents that created us.
Mm.
So, but anyway, I mean, it's okay. We don't need to be. I don't need to be too pedantic about the use of the
No, that's
term
great.
genius.
That
I
was a
don't have any
nice.
problem calling Einstein a genius. I'm just saying, like,
Sure.
it's important to kind of balance that as well, and
No.
realize that there's more to it than just that there's some people are special and more special or whatever it is.
Yeah. No, absolutely. No, I think that's true. It's we and maybe this is not even related, you tell me, but Glenn Hansard, the songwriter, was talking about how he felt that people's biggest problem in songwriting in terms of growing or becoming successful is in their overestimation of themselves. He says it's not that people don't
Hmm,
believe in themselves enough. He said it's
that's interesting.
actually that people believe in themselves too much.
Too much. That's
And
interesting.
it
Yeah,
brings me to the conversation. I know we're looping a lot today, and hopefully we're not
it's okay. Yeah.
circling, but hopefully I'm not steering us into another way of saying the same thing. But there is a sort of ignorance and overconfidence to constantly remaining in the flow state. For instance, an example, I for a long time was carving in living in flow state. And it was actually a time in my life when I was very focused on making money and I needed to
Mhm.
produce as much as possible. And so I don't actually remember a lot about that time in my life because so much of my effort and energy was placed in creating stuff that was very
Mhm.
similar to the thing that was made before it. And
Right.
so I found myself getting caught in a sort of confidence of my work when I stepped back, and especially with the help of other people, really great
Mhm.
artists. Maybe you know Rose Franson.
Oh
Um, uh,
yeah. I
yeah,
don't.
Rose Franson, a great painter. Who else? Fred Coggelo in the woodcarving world. Both of them actually tore me apart in a gallery. There was a wine and cheese gallery event that I did. It was the first gallery event I had ever done. It was right at the time I had taken a commission order for 240 works, right? My first distribution contract, right? So I was so excited, right? I had my first distribute. I thought this was going to be it for me. I'm a real artist now. I got a check for half of it up front, and I'm just like, this is going to be, like at the time I had a girlfriend with skeptical parents, and I was like, look at this check. How about that? Take this, skeptical parents. And what ended up happening was I brought the majority, actually probably more like 60% of that first half. So I brought maybe 40 or 50 carvings to the gallery showing. I had them up on the wall as one cohesive body of work. And what I realized, especially through the lens of seeing it through the eyes of someone as great as Rose and Fred, thank you, that the work looked the same. I mean, I had no idea I was doing it.
Interesting.
But I was just like, I was piecemealing parts of different things I had in my brain already, and I was lazily applying them, and they ripped into me in the middle of my speech and asked for an explanation of why all of these works had a lot of them had similar facial structures, and I explained to her this whole thing that I told you about the contract, and she said, you should see it as a privilege, an opportunity to grow yourself with each and every project, right? So reframing it, and it was a life changing, I would say deeply embarrassing, and actually quite a few people came up to me after the critique, what was supposed to be a presentation turned critique, and said, what a jerk, if that woman I didn't use the word jerk, but there's like, she was just out of line in your demonstration. And you know what, I didn't know what to say. I thought, I think that was a really good thing for me. And a few people came and said that, I think that was good for you. And I hated their guts, but I knew they were right.
So, how old were you at that time? What was that? How old were you?
Yeah, I was probably 20, I'm going to say 20. Well, let's see, his first girlfriend, 22 or 23.
Yeah. Perfect age for that to happen, actually.
Yeah.
Perfect age, because you're still sort of forming your ideas about things,
Yeah.
And because here's the reason I asked that question, how old you were, is because when you become more mature as an artist, you can actually take a form or an idea and repeat it repeatedly and find new ways of like digging that ground, right? And finding more and more gold, right? But when you do it when you're young, you're not even aware that you're not even aware what you're looking for.
Yep.
It's like prospecting for gold. Just like, just start digging anywhere.
Yep.
I'm just gonna keep digging. And everybody's like, that the gold's like way over there, right?
Right.
But when you have experience and you have the maturity of having gone through those kinds of experiences, you then can you can even take a simple idea and repeat it over and over.
Yeah.
But find little like twists each time you do it.
Yep.
But you were in a way you're just too young to know that, right?
Yep.
You hadn't had
without critical feedback, surrounded by people who were affirming, but also didn't have context, right? So wood carving in my area, experience, exactly. They didn't really know anyone else other than maybe their grandparents or their friends' grandparents who carved ducks or decoys or whatever. They didn't have an understanding of what it means to be creative and expressive, and these artists who dedicated their lives to it. Someone like yourself and Rose and these people that literally they live and breathe their art, and it's so personal, and it shows in their artwork, so that when you see it, it's so obvious. Not only the commitment to the ability or the skill, but also the commitment to communication of something larger. That is the thing that I lacked, and still, to be completely honest, at 26 years of age, I'm completely out at sea in terms of coming up with a solid vision for what it is that I'm doing. And I think that's, I'm a little bit comforted by the fact that you say that even getting caught up in the idea of naming something, it's sometimes it can be a little bit pedantic and unnecessary to worry too much about it, to put too much emphasis on it. That gives me comfort. And, and so, one of the things on a more practical level that I've been interested in since I'm a business major, and so I studied marketing, and so my brain naturally does not go to marketing, but as I've gone to school for it, as school does, it sort of shapes your brain, and it
Sure,
makes you
sure.
aware. It's like buying a
Gives
car.
you a lens. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. It's, you have the lens, and you see through that lens now, and you can toggle back and forth between your experiences and that lens. But I wonder what your life has looked like in terms of your business and and specifically in sculpture. What's changed over time, or if you're conscious of the business and to the extent that you can see that arc.
Oh boy, yeah, that's probably the hardest question you've asked me. Because, and the reason I say that is because I have my life and my pursuit of being an artist has had so many phases,
Hmm.
and not all of them were business phases directly related to my work.
Mhm.
So, for example, professor, like I said, professor for 11 years. I was a studio assistant for many years before that for
Hmm.
Audrey Flack, pretty
Hmm.
well-known artist.
Hmm.
And so I was her studio assistant for 10 years. They kind of overlapped with the teaching. And for a long time, I didn't make artwork at all because I didn't know, I was in the state that I was very deeply in that existential crisis stage of not knowing why I was doing it or what I was going to do.
Yeah.
I was very aware of the idea that I wasn't ready to make things that had meaning to me,
Hmm.
right? And it was frustrating. But fortunately, I had skill level, and I
Hmm.
was able to parlay that skill level into occupations like working for Audrey Flack, and it gave me time to process all of that. And when you ask about the business part of it, I'm not going to talk about like the business part necessarily, like marketing or so forth,
Oh,
but
sure.
just the career. Let's say career
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
instead of business,
Hmm.
because
Hmm.
when all those years working for Audrey, for many of those years, probably 5 or 6 years, I didn't really do any of my own artwork.
Hmm.
I did a little bit here and there, but not a lot. And mostly it was because, like I said, I didn't know, I didn't have I didn't know what I wanted to do. I was
Hmm.
very confused about the process of making artwork that had some sort of meaning that was important to me, and
Hmm.
ask the right kinds of questions that we just discussed earlier.
Hmm.
But I was very fortunate that I could work for her for those years. So I was work, even though I wasn't producing a lot of my own work, I was busy with my hands and my mind. And in addition, maybe probably most importantly, I was working for and with somebody who had a lot of experience and was very sharp
Hmm.
and very well educated,
Hmm.
very skilled at deploying her skills toward a specific purpose that she knew and was
Hmm.
confident about, right? And so she was my mentor in
Hmm.
that sense. It's really, I mean, when I look back now, I think, like, how did I get that job? Because I was both, I had some skill, but but at the same time, I was really like naive about a lot of things.
Hmm.
Um, so at the same time, she was my employer. She was also my mentor,
Hmm.
which is a kind of unusual situation because most
It
people, when they're
really is.
assistants, yeah, most people when they're an assistant for an artist, they're not getting mentorship too. They're
Hmm.
not, that they're given a job and they do the job, right?
Right.
But she part of the reason I think was, well, part of it's her personality, but part of it was that a lot of the work I was doing just with her. There weren't like
Hmm.
10 other people around helping her. It was just
Hmm.
me and her. Like there were a lot of time I spent a lot of time just in her studio just with her. And of course, we'd take breaks and we'd sit and we'd start talking about an artist or start talking, So it was very much more intimate. And so I was very fortunate to have that, because it did help prepare me for doing my own work. And then during that period, I also started teaching. I started doing my own artwork. So it's probably 5 years that I didn't really do much of my own work. And then I started doing, like, I really ramped up. Like, I really started producing work, and then I started teaching. I was a professor, which as I alluded to earlier, that was also, in retrospect, very well timed, because, as I alluded to earlier, I got so much better at sculpting when I started teaching, especially the first 4 years. I got so much better at making art and thinking about art, and just more efficient at making
That's
it because of
fascinating.
teaching. Yeah, because I was every week I was having to explain things to students that I had sort of subconsciously taken in and hadn't really processed again for many years, right? And then when you said I suddenly have to explain it, I think, oh yeah, that's how I do it, right? So I was really like reinforcing good habits for myself when I was teaching.
Right. Yeah. No,
Yeah.
absolutely. I used to, as a point of pride, and I'm embarrassed to say this, but for some reason I'm outing myself on my podcast, but I would say to students that I'm drawing these lines for you. And I would say I'm not drawing these lines for me, because I have a sense of proportion. I wouldn't say it quite that arrogant as arrogantly as that, but I would say, like, I don't usually draw on my carvings. I keep it at that, right?
Yeah.
And then I started to realize I'm biting myself in my own butt, because I'm not in proportion anymore. I'm just not. When I realized that, you mentioned Patrick Burke in an email. It was because of Patrick Burke saying, dude, you've got to get in a mirror, and you've got to turn around, and you've got to look at your sculpture in the mirror. And I was like, that sounds kind of neat. And I did it. And to my horror, it's like all of my work is crap. All of it. It's like everything I've done, I went through and I looked at all my, and what it did is it actually allowed me to tap into that part of my brain that does it by itself, right? So I can look at something and I'm not necessarily reversing it, but I can see, I'm looking at a sculpture right now, by the way, I'm not just staring off in the distance. I can see the way that it's not in proportion now.
Yeah.
Because
because of that, because
right.
you were like, what you were doing was you're preaching to yourself, look for this, look for this, look for this. You were making yourself look for it. This is exactly what teaching did. This is what it did for you, right? Teaching made you aware that you were not doing what you were telling them. You were like a hypocritical preacher. It's like, no, don't drink and no sex, and like meanwhile, you're like drunk in the bed, like the sacramental wine is like prostitutes coming in and out, like not doing anything you tell people to do. But that's what teaching does. It really makes you. Yeah, if you're teaching right, it shows you things about yourself as well. And I know exactly what you're saying, because this same thing happened to me when I started teaching. I would tell, I would come to students and be like, you're not focusing. You're not, like, you need to, right? And I would tell them, you're not, like you said, like drawing lines, you need to do this. And then I'd get in my studio the next day and I'd be like, oh yeah, wait, I need to do that too. I should be like, right?
Oh my gosh!
It really it was so helpful. And so to get back really to the original point of the question, which is about business and how it's evolved over time. That's when I started exhibiting my work. It was around that time. Must have been 2004
with Flack.
I guess it would have been
right around the time.
So I was there was a lot of my life is like this, where I have, and I've been thinking about this a lot lately, how I have these phases of doing something for like 7 to 10 years, and then another phase of doing another thing for 7 to 10 years. But there's a lot of times there's an overlap. So I was working for Audrey, and then I started teaching, and I started exhibiting at John Pence Gallery. So I had 3 things going on in my career at once at that time. Right. And eventually I just had to tell Audrey, like, I'm just too busy. My first daughter was born. I was trying to create artwork for the gallery for exhibition, and I was professor, and I just couldn't. I couldn't do all of it at once. So
Right.
that's when I phased out working for her full time. I still
Hmm.
do things for her now and then, and she's very dear to me and very important to my life,
Hmm.
because she's also my connection to the gallery that I'm in right now.
Hmm.
Because that was her. Lou was her dealer for uh, a large portion of her career, at least.
Hmm.
Uh,
Hmm.
and uh, um, but the point of that is that, and this is, I think, something that could be useful to people who are starting out, is that, there are lots of ways to build a career.
Hmm.
There's not there's this, I think, very mistaken notion that if you make your artwork, you show in a gallery, you sell your work,
Hmm.
and there you go, you're off. But things go in phases. Things slow down in one area and they speed up in another, and you need to be kind of nimble about, like, looking for those opportunities where they may come, right? And not get too hung up on, this is what I'm going to do, this is the
Yep.
only way. And Because the reality is, very few people have, the kind of career where they get out of college, they show in a big gallery, that's it. They're,
Right.
they're,
Yeah.
that's it. That's what they do for the rest of their
Yep.
life. That doesn't happen like that for most
Yep.
people. So I was, that my career has kind of been like that, where I've had these overlapping things that happen. Uh, and but I have seen that, with well, let me back up a little bit. I So there was that period where I was working for Audrey. I was a professor, and I was making one artwork and showing, and primarily at John Pence Gallery, and did that for a while. And then, obviously, like I said, phased out working for Audrey, and then I started. Doing courses overseas. Started teaching workshops overseas. I was still a professor. I started running workshops in Rome. And I still do that. I went to grad school, back to grad school again, and I got another
Wow.
degree. And yeah, and that was the same time. I can't believe all this was going on at once. I was getting divorced. My mom died. It was all this happening at once. And that's when I met that's when I met Lou. And in fact, so I had my first meeting with him. We sat down, and he said he wanted to represent me. And he said, but there's a problem. And I was like, what? He said, you're doing too many things.
Hmm.
You need to drop something. And that's when I decided to quit my job as a professor. I
Hmm.
thought, I think I was doing it. That had been 10 years. So
Hmm.
I decided, yeah, that's probably the thing that should go.
Hmm.
Uh, and I think I got what I could out of it, and
Hmm.
there were a lot of other reasons for deciding that was the thing to go. I won't get into it, although it doesn't matter, because that part of my life is gone.
Right.
But I don't want somebody to hear this and think that I'm down on education, higher education. But I was kind of burned out on the politics of academia
Hmm.
and the infighting, and it just started to feel like a dysfunctional family. Not the students, by the way. I mean, that was
Sure.
never the issue. I mean, I always
Right.
loved the students,
Yep.
but yeah, I just felt like I wanted to get out of that. It was becoming way too stressful for me, and I didn't think the rewards that I had received earlier, and the momentum I got from teaching kind of dissipated in that environment. That is.
Yeah.
So, and I was also really at that point also thinking about the workshops that I started doing. Uh, they just became exciting to me. The
Hmm.
idea of, going to Italy and teaching, and then of course I've taught in lots of other places around the United States and the world. And that just seemed like, okay, well, sounds more fun than going to a faculty meeting on a Wednesday afternoon
Right.
and arguing about where the budget's going to go. That doesn't, like, what would you choose? um, so, and then of course
Definitely the faculty, of course. Yeah.
oh yeah, faculty meetings are so much
Hmm.
fun. They
Yeah.
accomplish a lot.
I can only imagine. I've not had to, thankfully, I haven't been a part of that, but
But the other side of that was that
mhm.
the business, like the with Lou, of course, I
Yeah.
started exhibiting more, making more work, and
Mm.
and so I just needed more time for that. But
Right.
so the business, in terms of the business side of making sculptures, it's as an individual art form, not a collaborative art form like film or television, but as an individual art form, of course, it can be collaborative. I'm not saying it can't be. In fact, in some ways, every art form is a little bit collaborative. But as an art form that's
Yep.
primarily solitary, it's probably the most difficult. And some people may argue with that. It's up for debate. Obviously, I'm not the authority on everything. But part of the reason I say that is because it just requires such a commitment of time and expense. The money, it's the expense can be really a burden for some people. And so one piece of advice I would give to people who want to sculpt, and I don't want them to hear that and get discouraged and say, oh, well, I can't do this. It's possible. You just have to be very creative in the ways in which you can generate business for yourself, creative in the ways that you can work with certain materials, right? You have to find ways to be economical. And look, I do bronze work. And, so my solution, because I couldn't afford, when I first started doing it, I couldn't afford to pay $10,000 to a foundry to do a life-size sculpture. That's a low price, right? On the lower end. So I learned to do it myself. Yeah. So I learned to do probably 85% of the process myself. So I could keep my costs low. And the other thing that did was, and this is kind of important, once I got really good at doing the bronze work that I needed to do to make it affordable. Then when I could afford to have assistants and pay assistants, I could teach them. And not only could I teach them, but even if they already knew what they were doing, I was good at it too. So I could see who was good at what, right? So now when if I have a show in the gallery and there's an expense for casting, I can keep it all in house, pay people to do it the way I want to do it, because I know the process myself. So, as far as the business end of it, I do think it's important for artists, and we're talking about sculptors, to know all the aspects of the production end of what they do. Really be educated about it. You're going to save yourself a lot of frustration, money, time.
Yeah.
If you,
it's so true. It makes a lot of sense, and it's been my impulse. I've started an online carving, kind of like a school, really, but it's growing into more of a school than it is now, because right now it's a school of one professor, and that's me. But the school is growing and becoming something larger, and it's exciting. But what I've started to do is simultaneously start to produce more content for other services, for aside from the school, because I hire cinematographers to make the film videos for the school, but have started to go back to creating my own content for the school. And what it's done is it's forced me to start to understand camera settings. It forced me to understand lighting, and to start to learn more. And I'm still in the process of understanding this, developing that knowledge. But what it's done is it's made my connection to the cinematographer for my school that much deeper. And we have this, instead of us sort of looking at one another as peers, but in completely different areas, there's a mutual respect that we have for one another. Especially I respect going from me to him, because I love filmmaking, and I love what he does, and I love that his understanding is so much greater of color and composition. And when he composes a shot, I'm looking at all of the elements and I'm saying, I could do that, I could do that, I could do that. And then when I look at the image, it's like, there's no way I could create that with my skill. And so the result is greater than the sum total of its parts, that sort of magic, if you will. And so one of the things I've insisted upon with folks who work with me in the school is that they learn to carve or sculpt in some capacity, and Thomas as well. So there's a mutual appreciation, one, but two, there's an understanding of where the camera needs to be, because if there's a beautiful shot of a sculpture, of a film, of a sculpture, where we found the most flattering angle, it looks perfect. There's not a flaw in the sculpture, and it's very flattering to your lower part of your face. It's great. This is a great sculpture, a great video. It might not be helpful to the person watching in terms of helping them to learn to sculpt.
Right.
So if you are aware of what goes into sculpture, you can then sculpt from that perspective, right? You can or film from the perspective of a sculptor and say, okay, this would be helpful for someone to see.
Yeah, makes sense.
And so I really want the people working for me to see like to see like sculptors see, and then but then I also that goes both ways. It would be wrong for me to expect that of Thomas, but then not to then learn about what he's doing and all that goes into it. So there's a mutual understanding there.
Yeah, that's smart. It's very smart. It's very smart. Because otherwise, you're going to come across as somebody demanding who is also ignorant. It's like,
right.
Well, make the shot like this. And they're like, well, we can't do that. It's like, well, do it anyway. It's like, well, we can't do it. Make it happen.
Throws the clipboard at him, you know. Space, you know.
That's very smart. It's a very smart approach.
Sure.
You know, and look, I think this isn't one of my goals, and one of the things I really dream about a lot is. And this COVID time, actually, the last 3 years have been really difficult. I haven't had assistants here. I have apprentices that come and stay with me. I have an apprentice here now, and they can designate the amount of time they want to come. But I haven't had full-time assistants like I did in the past. And part of that's just financial because of COVID, and then prior to that, I built this new studio and I put all my money into that, and so things have kind of slowed down in that production end.
Oh, I've been there.
One of my dreams. Yeah, it happens. I mean, the life goes in phases like that. You know, you like a lot of money coming in, you're heavy production, you need to hire lots of people, and then it slows down. But you know, one of my goals is to really have more projects that could be collaborative and bring other people in, and I really crave something like that. Because even though I do love being alone in the studio and just like working and having clay in my hands, it's like the most enjoyable thing for me. But I would like to have more collaborative experiences, and that's one of my dreams to get to that stage.
Me too.
And the other thing is I want to create more opportunities for people here and other places that I may go to where I can have a much fuller apprenticeship type of program. Come and stay for a long period, particularly apprenticeship, meaning like people who just graduate from art school, right? Or just going to art school and they're just beginning and don't have the skills to be a full-time assistant that would, that could just hand over a bronze to or whatever. But somebody who's just beginning, and give them an opportunity to get that period in their life where they can just learn by observing, being around it, and start to explore their own work. And I could mentor. That's one of my dreams. I really want to hopefully get there soon, because I think I my time's running out. It feels like it sometimes.
Well, it feels that way for me too, and I'm. I shouldn't be feeling that way, but COVID also did make me specifically more aware of death, and that our time is, of course, finite, but that the things you do, they should matter, and they should also be intense. They should be meaning, imbued with meaning, right? And so,
or at least imbued with a search for meaning.
That's good. Yeah, that's good.
Because nobody, it's a journey. It's a journey, and it's when you were saying about being your age and you're still like trying to figure some of these things out, like what we're talking about titles, or what what is it you really want to talk about in your work at this moment in your life. The reality is that never changes. I still feel that way. I still feel like I'm. I still feel that way. There are artists that I admire. There are artists that I admire who are like a little older than me, and I look at their work. I'm like, wow, this is just it's so complete in its integrated wholeness. Right. The material, the concept, the the subject matter,
Hmm.
the whatever, and this could be representational or non-representational. And I just think, man, I'm not even there yet,
Huh.
and now I'm sure that other people would look at me and say the same thing from their perspective, but I
Me
think
right now.
maybe,
Yeah.
but the
No,
reality is
yes. Yeah.
we should always feel that way in some sense,
Hmm. Hmm.
like we should, if we and this isn't a competition. I'm
Right.
really against the idea that this is like somehow being an artist you're in competition with other people.
Hmm.
You're not. The only person you're trying to compete with is your present self, and try to
Hmm.
like do something that you didn't do before,
Right.
that then leads you onto another question, that then it's like you're like in this maze, just like with this golden thread, just
Yep.
you know
And it's
winding.
this, and it's also either it's unhealthy in the sense. Well, actually, a great mentor of mine said this. He said the problem with comparison is that when you compare yourself to someone and you're better than them, or in whatever metric that you're using, you end up having a problem with ego, right? But if
Yep,
you compare yourself to someone and you fall short, you're not as good as them. You have a problem of confidence.
there
So
you go.
you kind of lose
You lose either
either
way.
way.
Yeah, you lose either way. Yeah, and so yeah, that's exactly right. And so the process of discovery. See what for me it's comparison. Like when I mentioned like an artist who I admire, and I
Yeah.
see like this kind of a wholeness and completeness. It's not so much that I'm comparing myself to them and saying, shit, I'm crap. It's not that. It's
Yeah.
more that I see something in what they're doing, and I'm like, I see that they're doing something I'm not doing,
Mm.
that makes me curious, and I'm like, okay, what are they doing there? How did they do that?
Mhm.
And what can I learn from what they're doing? How can
Mm.
so it's more about I almost see that experience as an education opportunity for myself.
Hmm.
Right? Look at what somebody, and not necessarily somebody older, actually, it could be somebody younger, it could be somebody actually a lot younger. It could be, in fact, I've had that experience with students. That was one of the
Mhm.
other great things about being a professor.
Mhm.
Uh, I had some brilliant students. I mean, really brilliant,
Hmm.
doing very different work from what I was doing than
Right.
what I was doing. They finding their own path,
Hmm.
and it was really helpful to me to see these younger people, some of them not that much younger, but to see these younger people uh, who uh, who were doing something that was really complex and interesting in a way that I hadn't considered. Right.
Hmm.
Uh,
Right.
so it again, it's all an opportunity for education, but that process of of discovery never ends. So what I don't want it to end. I want to feel like that this is a journey that I will always be on, an adventure I will always be on.
Right.
That's what I want it to be like.
Hmm.
It's just a matter of opportunity, right? Can you get the opportunity to do that? And we're lucky that we have the opportunity. Let's be really honest here.
Yeah. No doubt.
I'm sure both of us can name 100 things that we would like to improve in our lives, and our opportunities for making the kind of work that we want to make, but we're pretty damn lucky.
Oh, no doubt.
So that's
It's
important to recognize.
absolutely true. Um,
Yeah.
we're
Yeah.
very it's a pretty privileged thing. Another mentor of mine says that, it's a very low percentage of people, maybe 1 to 5% of people, who can actually do art for a living.
That's true.
It's
It's
it's,
true. It's true.
it's
Yeah. In fact,
difficult.
I think they say it's something like only 10% of students in art schools are making art within 10 years of leaving art school. It's a pretty small percentage.
Hmm.
So, but then to actually make money at it and have a career in it, and make a living in the art world, which is a pretty big world, by the way. There's not just one avenue, but still, even within that, it's a small percentage of people that can find a way to survive doing that. But not that everybody should. Some people may discover that they really want to do something else, and that's fine too. But uh, uh,
Right.
yeah, we're lucky. Let's leave it at that. I feel like we are. I think we're very fortunate to have first of all, find our purpose in life, which a lot of people don't.
Right.
A lot of people don't. A lot of people are very frustrated. They got stuck in a path because they
Hmm.
were told, go to school, do
Yep.
this,
Yep.
And their parent, they said, well, my parents said I shouldn't be an artist. Okay, I'll be an accountant. And then 30 years later, they're frustrated or whatever. And so we're lucky in that regard. We're lucky that we found a purpose.
Yeah.
And two, we're lucky that we can actually pursue that purpose.
Yeah, it's true. But I think, it's like this thing of ultimate freedom, being trapped in this sort of bad sort of trajectory of doing what other people have kind of presented you to do. There is still choice. A great friend of mine,
sure.
And a painter, an instructor, taught me painting, and he started as a doctor in his retirement.
Yeah.
And so, at the age of 60.
True.
So he was
True.
incredibly skilled. No, I don't think anyone could deny his work. It was incredibly good. I mean, his landscapes were just, they had a certain radiance to them that, I can vividly imagine them right now. They were really good. And,
sure.
And so that's been encouragement to me and many people who have said, who have given me that sort of sob story of, well, I wish, I had the talent that you had or something. It's like,
true.
Yeah.
Here's the thing though, I was actually thinking more about people in parts of the world where they're just struggling to find a way to survive. That's what I was thinking of. I was thinking,
gosh, yeah.
I mean,
that's a whole nother thing. Oh my goodness, we're so privileged. Yeah,
you're very privileged. So that's more what I was thinking.
Because some people don't have the capacity to even consider what we're, the Maslow's hierarchy of needs is they're way lower on that scale.
Yeah. That's right. That's right. That's right. So that's more what I was thinking of. I think that in terms of having the good fortune to
no doubt
both discover our purpose and be able to pursue it. I think within this country though, there's a lot more. There's quite a bit of opportunity.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say everybody has it, but it's like it's a pretty high percentage of people can have the opportunity. And like you, I know quite a few people who had first careers in one thing and did other things. I could tell you lots of stories about some amazing people who, I know a guy who's a doctor, musician, a sculptor. He's like Renaissance man. I'm like, wow, how did you do all this? But like you said, that's because he pursued it. He wanted to do it. And,
right.
So sometimes people like they do, but look, I mean, we can't judge anybody in a sense. Like, so even the people who we would say, who would complain that they don't have, I wish I had the ability, or I don't have the time. And you look at them and you say, no, you have the time. You also don't know all the other things that are holding them back in their lives that are, experiences that they've had, that, traumas and difficulties that become impediments, whether it's mental or physical. So we can never really judge anyone in that regard. It's just not the charitable thing to do. Right. So I just leave it at, we're lucky, we're fortunate and grateful for that.
Agreed.
And, so
wholly true. So, okay. So at this point I would usually ask a few questions that are sort of designed to be rapid fire questions. This doesn't mean they have to be rapid answers.
Okay. I might break that rule here the way I'm talking. I'm extending the short questions. I'll try to keep it brief though. Go ahead. Go for it.
Nothing would make me happier than you elaborating on these, because they're some of them are pretty silly. So the first one is what pisses you off?
What pisses me off? Boy, that's a good one. I mean, what pisses me off? I don't know if I would say this. It pisses me off as much as it's something I resist. Being told what the right and what's being told what to do. I'm not totally anti-authoritarian. I mean, I pay my taxes, I obey the laws. I don't mean that. I just yeah, I've always been kind of, it's not that I'm rebellious, but I think this goes back to my childhood where, you know, and well, not to my childhood, but sort of recognizing as an adult how that affected me from my childhood, that very strict upbringing. And I think that's part of the reason. And I'm trying to work that out because I don't want that to affect me. You know, I don't. So like when you said what pisses you off, I actually, the whole, like a list of things went off my mind. And I thought, oh, what? Nothing should piss me off. You know, that's so immature. You know, I guess, you know, there are injustices that make me angry, but that's kind of virtue signaling. You know, I mean, yeah, okay, yeah, racism pisses me off. You know, because but that's like, I don't know, that sounds like I'm some sort of crusader if I say that. And the things that actually make me angry, you know, being disrespected or whatever, this is more fault in me than it is in some other thing that's happening, right? So when you ask that question, it's like almost like hitting a sore point, because I'm very aware of the fact that, you know, it's your response to things that matter, not the things themselves.
Oh man,
right? So
beautiful. That is beautiful. That's
so
so profound. Yep.
And so I laughed when you get asked a question, but then it's immediately like a pang in my heart. You know, it's like, oh,
beautiful one.
Yeah, that's uncomfortable, very uncomfortable.
Yeah.
To confront the things that make you angry. You know, because they're really just faults in you. And now, granted, there is such a thing as justified anger. Okay, if you're, you know, been used by someone or whatever, but ultimately it's your response to it that matters. You know, if you let that fester, then you're not doing the self-care and the inner work that you should be doing. So when you ask the question, I actually can name several things that, you know, can piss me off, but then I think, okay, well, I have a lot of work to do. Yeah, so
yeah, it reminds me of a Viktor Frankl quote where he says, between stimulus and response there is a space, and that space is our power to choose our response, and in our response lies our growth and freedom.
Yeah, it's brilliant. It's perfect. So I wish I could claim to have equanimity and perfect calm and stoic levity in every situation, but I don't. I wish I could, but yeah. So now I'm going to be thinking about that one all night, which is okay. That's all right. That's good. I mean, truth is, everybody should face those things. You know, we all should.
No doubt.
You know, one of the things about that too is that the response to things is how you respond to them, how you process them, and the decision making that you make in there is one part of it, but it's also how you view the outside world. You know, how you're viewing your fellow human beings. That's another thing. So, but look, I can't claim to be Solomon on this, you know, and perfectly wise. And there's another thing: you can have wisdom but not live wisely. Those aren't necessarily connected.
Solomon, right?
Yeah, exactly. That's a perfect example. Yeah. Right. Yeah. So it's a good question. It's a funny one, but also it's pretty close to home.
The next is even more funny in the sense of it not really having all that much significance, but it's one that I ask and folks have come to expect now, and it's what's your favorite pizza topping?
Actually,
the last two, as an example, the last two have been I don't eat pizza.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay. Here's the problem with pizza.
Okay. Oh my gosh, a third in a row.
Yeah. Well, not entirely. Okay.
Okay.
I'm actually, I'm the opposite in a certain sense. I'm a snob. Here's why. I've had too much pizza in Naples to be able to answer
I
that
can't imagine.
question
Oh my gosh.
in America. I don't eat pizza here. I just don't. So my favorite topping is the classic margherita pizza and like the original margherita Neapolitan pizza. That's it.
What is that?
So mozzarella. So it's tomato,
Yeah.
mozzarella, and basil. That's it.
Mm.
3 ingredients. That's it. It's all. So it's what's my favorite topping? It's zero, none. It's not about the toppings. It's all about the crust.
Man.
It's all about the crust. That's it. It's all about the crust. Because if the crust isn't good, I don't care what you put on it.
Right.
I mean, in Italy, if you get that, you can get just a white pizza. It's like they can have one ingredient on it. It could be olive oil and rosemary. It's all about the crust. It's not about the toppings.
That's good. We're gonna reframe the question.
Yeah. So
of which country of origin? Yeah, that would be an easy one. Okay, this is one that a little deeper now. What is a belief that you hold that maybe not a lot of people do?
Boy, I don't know. That's a really tough one because
it can be about sculpture. It can be about your philosophy.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, maybe the intensity of my belief in the importance of art for human existence. It might not be like I believe that art is important is probably not that uncommon. I think a lot of people believe that, but maybe the intensity to which I believe it, which is, I'm like I said, I almost have in like evangelical fervor about it because I think it's such an important aspect of what it means to be human. But that's not a good answer because I think there are probably a lot of people that do believe that. And then part of it is that I consider myself agnostic, which doesn't mean that I don't believe things. I just don't know. I just admit that I don't know anything. Right?
Which would revolutionize our understanding of the spiritual world too, if we would just say that.
Right. That's maybe where that lies. Is that I think I have. Okay, so here maybe it's this. Maybe it's that. Now this. I might be wrong that this is like not common, but I have an almost animistic view of the world. Right, that the spiritual and the physical are not separate; they're the same. That there's I don't know, that the entire universe is imbued with something alive. Right, and that doesn't mean that I understand it. I don't even know that I don't. I don't. It's actually, in some ways, it frightens me because it opens up a whole other set of questions of theodicy, theodicy, the problem of good and evil. That
I actually didn't know what that meant. So thank you.
So it's a bit of it creates a conundrum, but I don't know that I have anything in particular that I believe that very few people believe. Maybe UFOs. I don't know.
There you go.
I think there's something to that. I don't know. I think maybe another dimension, like there's some beings from another dimension that pop in and then they disappear.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's probably something not too many people believe. They probably think I'm crazy, but I don't know. Why not? Yeah, why not? There's got I don't. The one thing I do. Here's one thing that I think is close to some sort of empirical, some sort of knowledge that I could state, which is that I don't think we know that much. I think that we're way too confident in our assertions of what we know. Way too confident. Even people that I think have some good points. Like Richard Dawkins, right? He's so adamant, like God doesn't exist. Well, like you don't know. I mean, all I have is 2 eyes, 2 ears, mouth, nose, and this is my entire apparatus for perceptually accessing the world. and knowledge. In fact, the only true knowledge I have is like the experience of being in the body. I don't know anything else. I literally don't know, and I can't have any claim to any other knowledge, and even that might be like this suspect, right? So the those kinds of affirmative claims I find to be like a little bit misleading, because it assumes that we can somehow access information that doesn't come to us through this thing. This is another reason why I think why I do representational work, right? Because it is our world. This is it. You know, this is what we have, and it's the same reason I said, you know, when I go for walks with my dog or go into nature, I just feel the aliveness of it, but none of it is contemplating all these other questions that we have, right? My dog is just being and living and experiencing the world in its body as it was made to do. And there's a great quote from Mary Oliver where we're talking about her poetry, where she said, you know, she never goes for hikes or walks in the woods with other people because she doesn't want everybody to be looking at her strangely as she hugs trees and lays on the ground and feels the earth, and right, you know? But it's great, right? What she's saying is like she's acknowledging that this physical thing that we are has to be in contact with the world in order to understand it. That's all we can do. That's the only thing we have. Right. So yeah, I believe there's probably some aliens. There are some living. I don't know. There's something out there. I don't know. I don't know that they're like coming to get me, but yeah. Okay. So belief that very few people.
There you go. I like it. And quickly about Mary Oliver, I have not read Mary Oliver, but I've heard this quote from a couple of friends, and it's that one about not having to walk on your knees for 100 miles through the desert, repenting. You only have to let the soft animal of your body do what it loves.
Yep. Oh, that's so good. That's that's a poet's mind right there. That's what I was saying. It doesn't dogmatically assert anything, right? But it tells you everything you need to know, right? It's brilliant.
Okay, so the next one is
yeah.
What are some of the biggest mistakes you see, sculptors making in their professional careers? I mean, maybe you're not thinking about that many of other artists critically.
Yeah, not in terms of their careers. I don't.
Or their work.
That's not even in their work. I don't think that's. I don't really compare that way. I don't look at people like that. I don't think, oh, that piece, that would be better if they didn't do that. I'm more curious. I look at what they do and I'm like, that's interesting. I wonder what they were doing, why they made that choice. So in terms of the work, no, I don't look at people and say, oh, that's a mistake. Career-wise, I mean, I think there are some career mistakes that people make when they're young. Well, not even young, I guess, but like, say, for example, like being in a vanity gallery, right? But then again, I mean, that's not necessarily a mistake. I'm sure some people have parlayed that sort of thing into a career. So,
a vanity gallery, you said?
Yeah, vanity gallery is where you pay to show.
Okay. I've had this offer before, and I've just never even heard of it.
That's generally considered by a lot of people to be a mistake. But again, I mean, even saying that, I think as soon as I say something like that, the reason I'm hesitating to answer this question, because I immediately think, well, wait a second, I'm sure there's somebody who could contradict what I'm saying and say, no, it worked for me. I found a way to make so. Right. Here's another way of saying this: like, nothing is a mistake unless you don't learn from it. Right?
That's good. Yep.
I mean, things are only mistakes if you don't use them and things are only failures if you don't learn from them. Nothing is
Oh,
a failure,
that is
really.
such a great, very Viktor Frankl thought. Yeah, I love
Yeah,
that.
I'm a firm believer in that. I think
Yeah.
if you think in those terms, you suddenly become cautious and afraid to do anything.
Mm.
So, and I used this was one of those things that I used mantras I used to tell my students. I used to say,
Yeah.
look, nothing is really a failure.
Mm.
The only failure is the failure to act.
Mm. Yep.
That's it. If you do nothing, well, then you failed to act. But
Mm.
everything else, every other act, if it's followed by a contemplative observation of the experience, is not a failure,
Mm.
right?
Yeah.
If you don't learn from it, then it's a failure because you haven't taken the lesson. In a
Mm.
certain sense, everything that happens, whether it's a failure or a, like as you said, a career mistake,
Mm.
they only exist as failures and mistakes because you refuse to contemplate them, learn from them, and grow.
Mm.
But if you learn from it and grow, it's not a failure. Like whenever people, when I got divorced, people would say, oh, they would say, oh, I'm so sorry, and they would almost like or people would say, people talk about regret that they were married. I don't see it that way. I think, I don't regret any of that. I don't see it as a failure because I learned a lot, and it really helped me grow and change,
Mm.
and hopefully it continues to do so. And yeah, now there are parts of my life in my art career that I could see as mistakes, but they're only mistakes if I don't use them as an opportunity to grow, right?
Right.
So I find it really difficult to answer that question
Mm.
because everyone's different and everyone has a different path, and
Mm.
I don't want to give it. I don't want to put something out there that may make somebody think, oh shit, what am I doing? This is a mistake,
Yeah.
when they could actually turn it into something because they have a more creative way of looking at it than I do.
Mm. Thank you for
It's,
reframing that question. That's, I think, a great thing a good distinction.
Yeah, I don't want to. Yeah, I think we have to be very careful about that because
Mm.
we assume that we understand every individual and every circumstance when
Mm.
we really don't.
Yeah.
So I think the only way I could actually answer that with any kind of confidence and assertiveness
Mm.
is if it's somebody specific that I know, and I know the specific situation, I know them, right. I
Right.
think that's the only way I can really
Yeah.
fully answer that with a lot of confidence. So
Right. So maybe on
um,
a more practical level, then, what is a mistake that you see specifically in sculpture students making most often? Maybe it's
okay, that's a good
yeah,
question.
yeah.
Yeah, that's a good question. So student,
Mm.
because that one's easier for me to answer because I've observed it so many times. So,
Right.
for
Right.
example,
Yeah.
simple mistakes like, well, we're talking about the kind of sculpture that I do. Okay,
Yeah.
so because I
Figured.
can only come from that point of reference.
Mm.
Here's example would be not putting themselves in an advantageous position to observe what they should be observing to gather the information they need to put it into the work. So, for
Mm.
example,
Mm.
they're either too far away or they're not paying. Here's one I hear. Okay, this is a good one. This is one I tell every class I teach. I say this at some point. I look at around the room and I say, "You're all working too much," and they all look up like baffled, like, "What are you talking about? What do you mean we're working too much?" I said, "Well, there's a model here, and you're spending 5 minutes working and 5 seconds looking, right? You need to flip that. You need to you the source of information is
It's
out
on there.
there, not in
Yeah.
here."
Yeah.
So that's a common mistake see people making. They don't spend enough time observing and contextualizing those observations within the whole. So they don't
Mm.
take a gestalt view of the thing that they're working on
Mm.
and then break it down into parts, and take a gestalt view, break it down into parts, and then
Mm.
take those two broad and narrow observations and apply them. They get caught up here, right, in the material, and not
Right.
in the observation of the thing that they're trying to understand. That's the most common.
Right.
That's the most common mistake. for beginning students.
Mm.
Yeah.
Mm.
Not enough time observing, contemplating, assessing, and analyzing. And then, of course, as we said, you're never going to get into a high level of flow state if you're not doing that as you're learning.
Mm. Right. That's great.
Because because then it just becomes a solipsistic thing. You're just repeating the same habits. They're repeating a habit that they already have in here in the material. Then they're not trying to find a way to like reorganize that habit so that they have a greater set of tools with which they can work. So in fact, I think a lot of teaching actually is just assessing bad habits in people and trying to help them find a good habit to replace it. And by bad habit, I don't mean like that I am the arbiter of what's good and bad, but they can't assess it in themselves for their own goals. Right. So one habit in one art form is not the same as a habit in another art form. Right. They're two different things, but you have to be able to assess what you're doing that's contradicting where you want to go. Right. And in fact, that's the whole, we were talking about critiques earlier. You alluded to critique. To me, that's the entire goal of a critique. This became an enormous pet peeve of mine when I was a professor, especially toward the end. I can say it now because I don't not work with these people. I'm not going to name anybody either. But what would happen in critiques, very often what happens in critiques is they're telling the student to do what they would do on the work if it was theirs, right? Rather than asking the question, what is your artistic intention? What are you trying to do? And are you getting there?
Right.
And if you're not getting there, why aren't you getting there? What you're trying to do is help them refine their goal, assess whether they're on the path to that goal. Right. And if they're not on that path, assess what it is they're doing habitually that's not leading them to their goal. Right. That's it. That's all a critique is for in education. And so when applying that to what I was saying about observation, when you're looking at a model and applying it to clay, that's exactly what's happening. They have a goal that they want the clay to have some sort of mimetic resemblance to the model, and yet they spend all their time here looking at the thing and not at the model, right? So it's in a microcosm. That's what's happening to a lot of people on the larger scope of their work. So teaching is a lot of trying to replace bad habits that are specific to them with good habits that are specific to them. Right. And so those mistakes are and look, part of this is from experience because I went through it too. And I still have to think that. I still have to step back and say, okay, what do I really want to make? What do I really want to make it about? And am I doing the things that are going to get me there? That's all. It's so I think that's the main mistake that students make. Just the inability to self-assess whether they're procedurally heading in the right direction. Right. That's all. Yeah.
Yeah. And not to digress too much here, but there is a certain important, awareness is very important. And so it works the opposite direction, right? If you think about something that you don't want to be, if you put, say, I don't want to be that kind of sculptor. It's like driving or walking, the thing that you're looking at, you end up walking toward or moving toward it.
Yeah. Right. That's a good point.
So I really admire that you have, little patience for critique and in the sense of imposing your view of art on another person. I think it speaks to your sense of direction, and it shows in your work.
Yeah, and it also, part of it also is part of it's because I made that mistake myself early on as a professor, and I realized, no, this isn't serving the person. This is serving my ego, and I realized that I thought, well, this isn't why I'm in education. Like the reason I love art and the reason I like teaching art and being around other artists is because I like to see how other people view the world, right? And my goal is to try to help them do it better so that it enriches everybody, not just them and not just me, but everybody. So once I reframed it that way, it changed my whole approach to that. And it's not easy to do because we all have especially in that environment, you can get really caught up in this like ego battle. And but that even, but that's how I look at it. I think, I think if you're somebody who really likes art and artists, that's the approach you'll take. You just like, all you want to do is just see them succeed in their own way.
Yeah.
Because I want to see what they're going to make. I want to see what cool things they're going to do.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
That's it.
It's fantastic.
Yeah. I lost it.
Okay. And this kind of goes to what you said there about talking to younger people, giving them critiques. It's like, if you could go back to yourself and give yourself a piece of advice, maybe at the age of maybe your early 20s and early developmental stages, what would that be?
Boy, there's so many things I would tell myself. So a lot of things. I would tell myself a lot of things. One, I would actually tell myself that I would give myself a lot more confidence. I would tell myself to be a lot more confident. I had very low confidence when I was younger, very low, in almost every area of my life. And when I look, there are reasons for that, and we don't need to get into them. They're very personal reasons. We could, it would take us off on a whole other path. But looking back now, when I look at who I was even as a teenager, even before that, like when I was a teenager, I can see that the drawings that I was doing when I was very young, it's pretty obvious I had the talent. Like, and this isn't, I'm not saying this as a way of sort of bragging about it. This is just an observation.
Sure.
It's undeniable. I don't think you can, there's any way that it could be denied, but I didn't see it. When I was that age, I didn't see it. I thought I would fall into these deep depressions if I felt like it wasn't very good. I didn't have any mentor at that age to sort of encourage me. So I would go back and say, to give myself give myself a pat on the back and be like, no, you have it. You have it. You just need to, right? The other thing I would say is, the other piece of advice I would give is, when I was younger, this is connected to that. I would destroy things often. I would get in the middle of it, and I would be unhappy with it. I would destroy it. That's why I have very few things from that time period, because I was constantly destroying works. I would get so we're talking about things that pissed me off. When I was younger, that was the thing that would piss me off more than anything. I would just get angry, because it was anger toward myself. It was really, that's all it was. It's like they say depression is anger toward inward. I don't know if that's. I have to talk to somebody more qualified No, I don't mean you. I mean myself. Qualified. I mean, you probably are more qualified than some people you've talked to. But I do think that was, it's all of one piece. I was lacking confidence, and it affected a lot of things in my life. I didn't finish work. I destroyed a lot of things, and that was bad, because I had the ability to actually improve them. I just didn't believe I did. I didn't have anybody to show me how to get there. And that's what I would do for myself. And I also would have that confidence would have helped in other areas, such as, there are a lot of artists. I was living in New York at the time that we're talking about, and there are a lot of artists that I admired, mature artists who are advancing their careers, who I didn't meet them. I was too afraid. I was too timid. I was too self-conscious and lacking in confidence. And when I look back now, I think, no, you should have just, there's nothing to lose. So the reason I'm saying all of this is really, and I think the purpose for this question is because somebody else can relate to it, right? Yeah. There will be somebody else that can relate to it. And so you have to have you have to believe in yourself in some level. And you don't want to be deluded, obviously. You want to find the right skills. You don't want to, I'm never going to be a basketball player. It's like, I'm not tall enough, Right. There's no way I could ever be in the NBA. So I'm not going to delude myself, and I don't have those athletic skills. That's a gift that somebody else has, that I should just observe and appreciate and enjoy that they possess it for our enrichment of our lives, right? And so I don't want to enviously look for something that somebody else has. But the thing was that when I was that age, I knew I had that skill. Deep down, I knew it from the time I was a child. That was it. Art was me. That's who I was.
Mm-hmm.
From the time I was 5 years old, I knew I was an artist. It was my identity. And lack of confidence in myself that it really sabotaged. I was sabotaging myself all the time in so many ways. And so I would say to myself and to anyone who has a similar kind of personality for whatever reason, and it could be epigenetic, it could be genetic, it could be life experience. Don't do that to yourself. You have to like believe that there's something that you have that's unique that you can give to the world, and your only job is to try to find it, and then find the people that can help you get to where you want to go. So I would encourage people like that to, don't be afraid to reach out to people that whose work you like, who you would like to get to know, and just ask them questions. I mean, the worst they can say is no.
Right.
And that's not a personal rejection. See, that's the other thing. When I was that age, if I had approached, say, Louise Bourgeois, who is one of the artists, I wish I'd met her. I didn't have the confidence, but I always admired her. Or Robert Graham, who was, he was in LA, so it would have been hard for me to do. But I didn't have the confidence. I mean, even if they had said no to me, they said, no, get out of here, kid. That wouldn't have been personal, but I would have taken it personally. I would have seen that as, oh, I'm shit. That's why they didn't want to talk to me, because my work sucks and I'm shit. But I had that kind of thing in my head, and if I could go back, I would give myself a pat on the back and say, don't do that to yourself. This is self-sabotage. But anyway, it's a long answer, but there's a lot I would tell myself, I think.
Sure.
Yeah.
It's a good
but
answer.
Then, the thing is, like that's more for other people than for me, because in a way, obviously we can't go back. And in a way, the journey that I have, this is mine, right? This is who I am. I wouldn't be here if it didn't happen the way it happened. And so now part of the purpose of, like I said, part of the purpose of that question, I think, is for other people who may have similar problems with their assessment of themselves, but also for myself, for the future, to say, hey, wait, I could do that to myself back then. I could do that to myself now, right? I could say to myself now, okay, wait, okay, so you got hurt when he asked the question about, like, what makes you angry, right? Okay, now why is that? Like, now that I'm older and I have, if I can take that kind of reflection to my younger self, why can't I take that kind of reflection to my current self? Right. So that's I think one of the functions of a question like that. It's for other people and for yourself now.
Right. That's good. It's true.
Yeah, because if you think about it, who I was at 7 or 14 or 21 is, I'm still, that person's still in there.
Yeah.
They're still there.
Yeah.
The child's still in there. I know we're going off on all kinds of tangents here, but when I got separated, it was really hard. It's emotionally, I don't care what anybody, some people, maybe it's easy, but it was really hard, right? Because I thought I failed in many ways. There were all these like deep emotional problems that I was going through, as we separated, and it was tough for her too. But because nobody gets married because they want a divorce, right? That's like crazy. When I went into some counseling because it was really difficult. And there's one thing that the counselor said. She was brilliant, but there's one thing that really stuck with me from my sessions with her. She said, one of the primary functions of adult relationships is to help us understand and cope with the traumas of childhood. Because childhood is traumatic for everybody in some regards. Some people it's really traumatic, and some people it's just whatever the normal trauma is. Because the normal trauma is you don't understand the world. All these things are happening to you that you don't have any control over, and they have all these emotional effects on you. Whether it's anger at your parents or whatever, there are all these things. And one of the primary functions of adult relationships is to help you, sort of understand and deal with that. And the primary adult relationship we have is with ourselves. So if you're not doing that kind of self-assessment and self-care, then you're not performing this exercise that you're giving your guests on the podcast, which is,
right.
What would you say to your? Because in a way, that's such a good. I mean, I hear that question. People ask that. That's a pretty common question. But if you think about that question on a deeper level, in a way, that's a good question to get people to think about. Really, what it's about is who they are now, right? So when they answer that question, when I said that question, but when I said that answer to your question, that I would go back and give myself more confidence. In a way, that's what I need to be doing to myself now, right? In a certain sense, because that person's still with me. I'm still, the 7-year-old, the 14-year-old, the 21-year-old, right? That carries forward, and so it's a fascinating question. I think there's a lot more I could say to that question, but we've already been talking for a long time, and I've been rambling on. So
no,
so I don't
not at all. Not at all.
But,
this has been an absolute joy and pleasure. So there's not even a hint of that. So, but no, that's so true. That's you're in a relationship with yourself, and it reminds me of a message that I had heard a long time ago. It's like this idea that the Christian principle of loving other people as you love yourself implies this sort of self-love, where if you don't have it, how are you supposed to love other people?
Yeah, exactly.
Where's it coming from?
That's exactly right. And I think that's exactly right. And I think what I was saying there is, when I was that age, going back, I had an immense amount of self-hatred, like an immense amount of self-hatred. Yeah. And so, I was suicidal. I was very, I had this immense amount of self-hatred. And so you can't, and here's the thing, to me, the idea of loving yourself would have been against what I was taught as a child. And I don't want to, you and I have had some conversations about this privately. I had a conversation about this privately, but I won't get into it because I don't want to bring family into conversation. But it has to do with my upbringing, a lot of it, and things that I was taught about myself, and but they're people in my life. They had their own traumas they were dealing with, and they were dealing with their own way. So it doesn't do any good to start pointing fingers, right? What's the point of that? Like, at this point, it doesn't matter, right? It's past. I now have to take that question that you asked and ask myself the same thing now. Because the person I am now, there's going to be a future version of myself. And then you're going to, maybe in 25 years, we have this conversation again, and you're going to be like, hey, Brian, what would you do if you could go back to when you had that first conversation? What would you tell yourself, right? Why not ask that question now?
Now.
Right?
I feel like I'm being ministered to. And I use that word.
Oh yeah, right. yeah. That's a whole. Totally. I
pull some way.
Yeah. That's another conversation. But
I'm going to. I feel like I'm going to church. I'm getting my money's worth right now. I'm going to church. So if you could just share with us, and this one actually stumps a lot of people, so feel free to. Think on this for a bit, but what's a time that you've laughed hardest?
Ooh. Oh boy. Time that I laughed hardest. Ah, boy. Man, this is a good one. This one's hard because there are too many to choose from. I have to think hard. I laughed hardest. I think it is something with my kids, where it's just like this surprising things they come up with. It's just like, let me. I'll answer this another way rather than hardest, because it's this is because hardest means like means like intensity, right?
Right.
I'll tell you the time I laughed. That gave me the longest chuckles. I just laughed about it for a long time. Okay.
Perfect.
So this is one of my favorite stories about my daughter. She's 16 now. This is when she would have been 4 years old, and let's see, it's about 4 years old. My youngest was 2 years old. She might have been 5, but 4 and 2, between 4 and 2 and 5 and 3, or somewhere in there, right? And so I was teaching at the university. I was a professor, and it was in Connecticut. So I had a long drive. It's like a 200-mile drive to the university where I was teaching, and I would take them to a nanny on the days that my then wife worked. I would take them to a nanny for the day until she got done from work, and she would pick them up. Anyway, one morning I was getting ready. I had to take them to the nanny and then head up to Connecticut to teach. And I was getting their lunch together in the kitchen, and she came into the kitchen, and she started telling me this story that happened when she was really little. Like, she was not even 2, I don't think. She must have been maybe around 2, and she's telling me the story, and I looked at her. I said, Naomi, how do you remember that? And she said, well, when I want to remember something, I take a picture of it, and I have a book, and I take the picture and I put it in the book, and then when I want to remember it, I open the book and I look at the picture and I remember it. Which I was like completely blown away by this when she told me this, because this is essentially the mnemonic device, right?
Right.
It's the memory castle.
Yeah.
And I said, Naomi, who taught you that? He said, nobody taught me. I made it up when I was 2. Holy, this kid! I was like shocked. I couldn't believe it. So anyway,
girl.
I was like, I couldn't believe it. Like, I was like, wow, this is.
I still would do that. Yeah.
It's exactly. I mean, it is actually a technique, right? Because if you place something if you place a memory in space, because your memory and space in part of your brain are connected. So that's why the memory castle works, because if you can if you want to remember something, you put it in a place that you can walk to and it'll appear there, right? So anyway, I was like blown away, and I'm thinking about this, and I'm like it was on my mind. I'm thinking, so I rush out the door, I put the girls in the car, we're driving down the road. I get about 2 miles down the road, and I look, and I'd forgotten their lunches in the kitchen. I was like, oh crap. I looked back, and I was like, oh, girls, I forgot the lunch. We have to turn around and go back. And I looked in the mirror, and Naomi looked at me, and she said, well, you should have taken a picture of it. And she had this smile on her face.
Oh my gosh.
It was like, I started laughing. I laughed about that all the way to Connecticut. I was like, this is so funny.
That's great.
She knew she was being clever because she had this little smile on her face.
That's adorable.
Yeah. So
that's pretty cute, man.
Yeah, those are like there's a bunch of stuff like that.
Yeah.
That when I think about it, it's really fun. Maybe not the hardest laugh, but the one that gave me the most long-term chuckles. Right? I still laugh about it today. I'm like, yeah.
Fantastic. I love it. Well, Brian, this has been such a pleasure, and I hope to do it again sometime.
Yeah, likewise. It was a lot of fun. Really good questions and good topics. I really love this. This is a great podcast you have going here. I wish you a lot of success with it. I think you can really expand this, and you have a great style of conversation and good questions. It's really good stuff.
Thanks.
So once you get it all put together, I'll be sure to promote it. And if you want recommendations of people to talk to, I'm happy to send them your way. I'm really grateful that you had me on. Really appreciate it.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. And I'll take that. I'll take that for sure. I'll use all the suggestions I can get. So bless you, man.
Well, thank you. Thank you. All right.